So we were established back in 2013, having undertaken like a mentoring program for 12 community energy groups around sort of mid-central Sussex. And we did a year-long mentoring program with those groups, supported by the Cabinet Office and Department for Business and Energy, that was then Department for Energy and Climate Change. And from that process, we all came together every month for a year in Lewes, and we set up Community Energy South as a support mechanism for groups across the southeast. There are actually now 42 groups across Essex, Kent, Sussex, and Hampshire that we support. And our mission is very much to be sort of the voice for the sector in the southeast, and we report in to Community Energy England. Also to do lobbying for government where we can, and support groups to do lobbying, and then look at innovation and innovation projects and capacity building for groups, and support new groups in setting up and linking them up with other experts. So that's what we're all about, and with really the fact that we're all cooperatives and we're stronger together. So yeah, just about community energy, you can go onto our website and find out all about it. But it's about people coming together in your community to focus on reducing energy usage, understanding how to get to net zero, group purchasing, or supporting your community in energy awareness, and making energy affordable, really, and accessible for all. And over the last 10 years, all of our groups have worked in fuel poverty and hydro and heat and lighting and solar, and we shared that knowledge across with other groups. On the South Downs, with South Downs National Park, and on our website, you can now see our pathways roadmap. So we've actually got a full sort of roadmap presentation on how to start up community energy and about your journey. So that covers what's happening in South Downs National Park, how to start a group, who you need. And we encourage people not to do it on your own. You need to reach out to your community and find out who's there. There's loads of expertise, people who are specialists in writing articles, and journalists or people who love writing, to more technical people who love the technology elements, or running events or running energy cafes and all sorts. So it's all about looking at your expertise in your community and seeing how you can support and be a resilient community. So this is the kind of the face of community energy across the southeast. Yeah, there's loads of exciting projects that have happened, hundreds and hundreds of projects that actually go into the millions of pounds now across the southeast, from solar farms to schools. There's Nick Rouse in Lewes in the top right-hand corner, who is the current community energy champion for the UK, on the top of a school in Lewes where the community put solar. And down in the bottom left, North Kensington Community Energy is a community energy group that started off after the Grenfell Tower disaster, and they put solar on their local community buildings. So, it's really varied. This is what community energy looked like back in 2018, 2019. The green dots are the community energy groups. And you can see that they're really, there's a high level of community energy groups around Lewes and Brighton, because that's where we started the mentoring originally. And in the UK, there are now nearly 300 working community energy groups, but we have the highest amount in one area to pull from, so which is really useful. And the red dots are energy champions that work in providing energy advice for communities and fuel poverty advice. And the purple dots was a scheme that we did in Faith and Power, so reaching out to different faith groups in energy, which was really interesting. And there's loads of partnerships to be made for community energy, not least the county councils or the authorities like South Hants National Park, but also the railways, who are the biggest energy user in the southeast, the gas network and the electricity network, so UK Power Networks and SSE. They want to work with communities, so our goals are very aligned. In fact, those organisations love community energy, and so we try and make those links, and they bring funding with them, which is really useful. And those partnerships are really important. I talked about activism before. We do a lot of lobbying with government and with politicians, and end up in Parliament and capture our reports. So on a regional basis, there is the Regional Energy Hub that's been set up by the Department for Business and Energy, which supports energy across the whole region in the southeast, and community energy is embedded in that strategy. So that really helps policy-wise. And you'll find if you have a project, you can reach out to the Regional Energy Hub and get their support.
Yeah, sure.
There's someone there. If they can go on mute, if you wouldn't mind. And this is just a reference. We'll share our slides afterwards, but you can come in to, again, look at Community Energy Shout's website, and there are guidance documents there on community energy. Right, there are a lot of community energy groups put solar on schools, and for good reason as well, to try and support, children to learn about energy. Because, well, there's no teaching them. They know all about climate change and being energy efficient. But this is quite interesting. Back in 2012, the first sort of solar projects went on schools. And in 2019, when we last did this record, there were 84 schools in the southeast with community energy on them, with community solar, which equaled about 4 megawatts. And that's 1,265 tons of carbon saved per year. And it's really good. Most community energy groups engage with their schools, and it's complex, but we worked it out, and community energy groups are very good at that. And then heat projects. There are 2 really amazing heat projects going on at the moment with communities and rural communities. One is in Barkham, which is just on the edge of the park, where community heat is a pathway to net zero. So where Ovesco are working with UK Power Networks and the village of Barkham to develop a local area energy plan for everybody to transition off oil heating, where 80% of the village use oil, and also to look in the transition to electric vehicles as well. And then in neighbouring village in Firle, which is in the national park, BHESCO have been looking at a heat network, and supported by the Rural Community Energy Fund, which is a fund that is bespoke to community energy that we can all draw on. So have a look at that, both those projects, and reach out to those groups and find out if they can support you. Now, just to give you an idea for lots of projects, if you were starting off, obviously the first one where quite often people go to is solar for the community. So solar roofs, working out, maybe how you could group buy solar, or if community buildings can go have solar on them, like, you know, your village hall or other projects, or if there are businesses in your community that have high energy usage, and maybe they can't afford solar, but the community energy model could work for them, where the community put the solar on their building and raise the money from the community to pay for it. You could also do a hydro scheme, and we've got Michael is going to talk about hydro later. Supporting households on energy usage, support the vulnerable, run an energy event in your community and invite experts and local suppliers and installers, and get the installers to focus on the community and give advice. Do an eco-energy home event. There's lots of homes in every community that are kind of prosumers, that are net zero, that you can promote and talk about, and they're normally happy to talk about it. And offset your community energy usage. So find out how much your energy of your community is in carbon, and then look to see if you can offset it. Excuse me a second. Right, and then there's also something called the State of the Sector report. So there's a national body for community energy called Community Energy England, and they do an annual State of the Sector report, and which has been going on for about the last 6 or 7 years. I'm lucky enough to be one of the directors of Community Energy England and meet with groups from across the country. And the State of the Sector reports are a really good resource, just to look at what the sector looks like across the country and play that back to your community, so you're not on your own. As I say, there are 300 live community energy groups across England and Wales, and excellent Community Energy Scotland. You know, all that are always willing to give advice to a community, and, you know, so you're not starting from scratch. Aha, so here's our friend, the Dalai Lama, who reminds us that if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. And so, you know, it starts from the beginning, but you really can make a big impact with community energy. And I know from our trips to Parliament, you know, with community energy groups, that the ministers and the MPs, you know, really rely on our activism and to give them information and demonstrate, you know, that we want to get to net zero, and that community energy plays a big part in that. So do keep in touch. You can go to the Community Energy Chapter website, join our newsletter, register your group. If you're interested, you can register your community. Get involved, and in our masterclasses, we have them every month, and encourage, if you know an organisation that wants to become a partner, then do point them our way. And once again, I'll point you to the Community Energy Pathways guidance documents on our website. So these emails, you can take that. Probably Liz will put that in the chat at some point, or I'll follow up with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ollie. So do you want to introduce the next speaker?
Yes, I will do. So I'm going to pass on to Chris Fairbrother from South Downs National Park, who is going to outline the climate change strategy for South Downs National Park, and also Amy on policy side, and then hopefully before 11 o'clock we can pause for some questions.
Thank you, Ollie. Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Fairbrother. I'm the Landscape and Biodiversity Strategy Lead at the National Park Authority. Certainly over the last 2 to 3 years, I've been taking more of a lead on our climate change work, starting back in probably 2017, when I produced the adaptation plan for the national park, and more recently when I've been picking up work about developing our own strategy and action plan. So I've been leading on the climate change work for the national park, but also with National Parks UK, I've been helping to coordinate efforts across the UK national parks to try and do some collaborative work on this, particularly in terms of preparing for Glasgow and COP26 later in the year. So we're looking at joint projects, shared metrics and targets, that sort of thing. I thought it'd be useful to give people on the call today a little bit of background about the strategy work we're doing and why we've started working with Community Energy South on developing a community energy pathway. Really, the start of this was back at a member session we ran in 2019. The National Park have members. Some of them are local authority members, some are parish members, and then we have some that are co-opted at national level as well. And I think they recognise there's an increased need to step up around climate change, that the National Park could do more, and that we had a role to play around this area of work. And I was asked to develop a strategy and action plan to sort of set out how we might do that and to demonstrate the areas that the National Park Authority itself could add the most value. So how could we support local climate action, both as an organisation and across the national park as an area? And right from the outset, that had a strong emphasis on working with local communities. In terms of, I think Ollie's already mentioned UK net zero targets for 2050. We also have set out targets for ourselves. As an organisation, we're aiming for net zero by 2030, and we have an ambition to be net zero as a national park area by 2040, so slightly more ambitious than the UK targets. And in recent days, we've just I've just heard that the UK national parks have jointly signed up to this as a target. So that's quite a big offer from the national parks in terms of taking action on climate change. And certainly at a local level, we've developed an action plan which sets out our work and the sort of projects we want to take forward. And the community energy pathway was one of the areas that we wanted to focus on. In terms of the priorities for our strategy, a lot of them are, as you would expect with a national park, you know, our statutory purposes being around landscape and biodiversity and cultural heritage. We are focusing strongly on nature-based solutions. We've linked the nature recovery and climate change agenda there, and a lot of our work is focusing on dealing with both of those issues. We're working with the UK National Park family in terms of having a national delivery plan, which was published earlier this year. We've also been doing a bit of baselining around our own carbon footprint, both as an organisation and for the wider national park, and looking at that as well down to parish level, which Ollie also mentioned. So we've got a bit more data now about individual parishes' carbon performance and how that might be improved. And we are starting to engage more with the local authority partners, both at county and district level, around how we can play a role in supporting them. They obviously have a wider remit than us in terms of housing and transport, but we can play a key role around the shift to low carbon and a green economy as well. So in terms of the actual community energy pathway project, this is a pilot, and we were initially working with parishes and groups across the park, ones that have kind of identified as being ready for rapid transition and are looking to do some work around shifting to a low carbon future. We've tried to kind of get a spread in terms of geographic location across the park, and are willing to work with groups actively through partnership with CES. And I think we are keen to scale this up beyond the initial pilot and look to work with as many groups as we can, or to support as many groups as we can through the pathway. And I think we've already seen there's an appetite for that. There's a great number of groups that have already expressed an interest, and there's certainly a lot of people on the call today. So I think it's proving to be very successful. So in our strategy, we are committed to supporting local communities and businesses around developing an approach around renewables. And we realise that means we have to look at our policy framework. It means we have to consider how we might support that across all of our activities. And I think, you know, as Ollie, when he shared his slide earlier, we could see there's a lot of activity already going on in the southeast, but we were aware that within the national park, the sector was underdeveloped. That doesn't mean there wasn't a lot of interest. But what we did have was a good existing network of communities within the national park, which we developed through our neighbourhood plan work. So really working with Community Energy South, it helped us to bring in the resources and skills that we lacked, but it enabled us to use our existing network. So it was a good match in terms of projects, and we were very pleased when Ollie offered to support us on this. So in terms of the Community Energy South work, the project itself, summary, it's about stimulating in the community energy sector across the national park and assessing the potential and interest out there from local groups. It's also about supporting them to develop their ideas and to get them through, if you like, to the funding stages of their proposals, and to give support and knowledge exchange where possible. And I think what I haven't mentioned on the slide here is the link through to planning. We're aware that, you know, existing local plan policies may not be best matched to this. We are committed to reviewing them. We understand that we need to be supporting community energy in the national park, and part of the project will be looking at our planning guidance and how we can, if you like, be clear on being landscape led, but also very open to supporting community-based renewables where possible. So I think, you know, it's clear for us that in working with our local communities, we are supporting them to become more resilient to climate change. And in spite of the constraints we've had during 2020, we have managed to get a couple of projects underway. Obviously, the Community Energy Pathway, as Ollie said, has been going for about a year now. This is our first masterclass for the National Park, but there has been a lot of support already for some local groups to organise themselves and develop their ideas and move towards developing funding proposals. We've also been doing some work, as I said, about developing an understanding of parish level carbon footprints, which I think is going to be a feature of a later presentation today, because I think a significant part of this is helping communities to understand their current carbon footprint and how they can take action and how we can support them to take the relevant action. So it is an area of work we will be developing further in future. So as I said, though it is a pilot, we are very keen to scale it up, and I will be pestering my chief exec for further resources to do that if we get sufficient interest. And I think what I was going to do there is hand over to Amy Tyler-Jones from our planning policy team, just to give you a bit of an understanding around our current planning policy around this area, and a little bit of understanding around the work we've been doing around neighbourhood planning. So we think there's a good fit in terms of supporting community energy programs through the neighbourhood planning process.
Thanks, Chris. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I assume you're right. Yeah, so I'm Amy Tyler-Jones. I'm in the planning policy team. I've done a lot of work with neighbourhood plan groups, and I also work on planning policy, general policy around climate change. I can't see the slides. Chris, are they still up on the screen? You're on mute, so I...
No, you're right, Amy. They're not. They are back on the...
They're back on. Great, thank you. Yes.
Can you see them?
Okay, well, if I can have the next slide then, and I'll get going. So,
Liz is driving, so...
back one. You jumped ahead. Go back one.
Oh. Hold on a sec.
Chris has got the thing, so he's just going to have another go.
There we go. Oh, great. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. So, well done.
Just to kick off with the planning policy context as it exists at the moment in the South Downs National Park, starting with our local plan, which was adopted in 2019, and it's the first time that there's been a single local plan for the whole of the national park. and it's part of the statutory development plan. So that means that all planning decisions are sort of are guided and have to be informed by the local plan. And it's different from local plans you might find elsewhere, because it is a local plan for the national park. So the landscape is very much at the heart of this local plan, and conserving and enhancing the landscape. The other, well, there's several things that are quite unique about this local plan, but what I want to highlight is also that ecosystem services really are central to our local plan. So those are the benefits that we get from the natural environment, be it fresh, clean drinking water, soil for food production, or carbon storage. Those are the ecosystem services that we are asking all development to recognise and enhance. So policy SD2, ecosystem services, really sets the overarching framework for our response to climate change. The next sort of key policy, SD48, on climate change and sustainable use of resources, this sets some minimum energy efficiency requirements and water standards for development, for new development, and it is applied proportionately depending on the scale of development. And I'll talk a bit more about the SPD, which supplementary planning guidance, which provides further guidance around SD48. We do also have policy SD3, which relates to major developments. So these are developments that could potentially have a significant adverse impact on the national park and on its landscape, its wildlife. And so there are very sort of stringent measures and requirements within that policy. So for example, major development has to be zero carbon and zero waste. SD51, renewable energy, I think will be one that a lot of you will be interested in, because this really sets the provisions for any renewable energy that requires planning permission. Obviously, some micro-generation schemes don't require planning permission. So PV panels on your roof, if you're not in a listed building or in a conservation area, generally wouldn't need planning permission. But this policy is supporting appropriate renewable energy schemes which conserve and enhance special qualities, so the landscape, the wildlife and the cultural heritage of the national park. And it sets out some provisions for what would make such schemes appropriate. So one of those is the ability to be able to reinstate a site should the technology cease to be operational, being able to maintain public access to a site, and ensuring there's no loss of the best agricultural land. The second part of SD 51 also talks about small-scale solar arrays and how those need to be designed to minimise visual impact, being screened, and also that making use of roof space where you can, and where that fits within the landscape and minimising visual impact. And I think we're going to hear a bit more about a PV scheme at Plumpton College where they used roof space there. I've also highlighted some of the other policies in the local plan. So we've got SD22 on parking, which talks about electric vehicle charging. And then there's a whole suite of policies that are all around the national park's building resilience and adaptation to climate change. So reducing water use. We've got our SD50 on sustainable drainage systems and making sure that those are actually multifunctional, providing biodiversity and amenity, as well as the drainage function. And green infrastructure, obviously a key element of making the national park more resilient to climate change. If I could have the next slide, please, Chris. So last summer, we adopted sustainable construction supplementary planning document, and this provides further guidance for the SD2, SD48 gives more detail on how developments can meet those policies. This is all about how they can incorporate the sustainable design and requirements that we're looking for. It applies to all different types of developments. There are some exclusions, so residential extensions aren't covered. The policy needs to be applied appropriately. But there are some minimum requirements set in that we can measure proposals against. So we're asking developments to reduce their CO2 emissions by a minimum of 19% through energy efficiency measures, and then on top of that to provide at least 20% reduction in CO2 through on-site green energy generation. And on some of the larger sites, we're then also seeking a proportion of passive home certified schemes. So that's the sort of highest level of energy efficiency. And there's also then requirements around water use, waste and recycling, and incorporating green roofs into new development. If I could have the next slide, please, Chris. And just wanted to give an example of, this is a scheme that granted permission towards the end of last year, and it meets all of the SPD requirements. So a scheme of 17 new homes in West Ashling, in West Sussex, and there they've actually reduced emissions. They're going slightly but beyond the SPD requirements there, so between 40 and 50% reduction. 2 of the homes were passive house certified. All of the homes have electric vehicle charging points. There's also on materials, no plastic windows or doors are being incorporated, and they've got lots of green infrastructure and tree planting and some green roofs incorporated into the scheme. If I could have the next slide, please, Chris. So I'm going to talk also about neighbourhood planning, and neighbourhood plans are a part of the planning framework. They're part of development plans, so once they've been adopted, they have the same kind of weight, importance in planning decisions. But what's unique about neighbourhood plans is that they are prepared by communities, by parish councils, and they've been incredibly popular across the national park. We've worked with over 55 communities who've started up doing neighbourhood plans, and 30 of those have been all the way through the process and actually have neighbourhood plans in place. So as well as being able to say where they might like to see new housing go, what type of housing, the design, some of these neighbourhood plans have looked at how they can respond locally to climate change, and have included policies on renewables, on community energy. I think there's quite a few people from Amberley here, so I don't know if you're aware of the neighbourhood plan for Amberley, but they have a policy which sets out support for renewables for both individual properties and groups of properties. And also Lavant is another example of a neighbourhood plan where they've got a policy specifically supporting for community energy. Twyford are still sort of in the final stages of preparing their neighbourhood plan, and they've got a draft policy there where it sets out support for microgeneration, but that they are acknowledging that actually some freestanding solar arrays and wind turbines are unlikely to be appropriate in their area because of the landscape sensitivities. The other important thing to know about neighbourhood plans, that as well as setting the sort of policy framework for local community, for that local area, once there is a neighbourhood plan in place for your parish, the parish will actually get a greater share of the community infrastructure levy. So that's the tax on development that's collected, and you'll be hearing a lot more from Jess about shortly, but really just to let you know now that once there is a neighbourhood plan in place, the community gets a 25% share of that they can spend on projects infrastructure projects that are linked to development in their area, and they have quite a bit of flexibility about how they spend that. So that's a useful thing to know as you're thinking about actually implementing and getting some of your community energy projects underway. So I hope that's given you an overview where the sort of policy is currently in terms of our local plan and supplementary guidance and neighbourhood plans. And as Chris mentioned, we will be developing guidance, really learning from the sort of experience of these pilot projects and how we can support community energy projects coming forward in the national park and balancing up our role in protecting the landscape. I think we might have some time for some questions.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, we've got quite a few questions that have been put in the chat box. I've been listing their names. So the first one, it was Paul Quinn. So Paul, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question? And then it's Tom Broughton. So Tom, you might want to unmute yourself in advance.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, before we do, we've got a good 18 minutes for questions. So, so we can run through quite a few. Go ahead.
Thank you. Paul Quinn from Hambledon in Hampshire. We've got well over 70 grade 2 listed buildings in the village and grade 2 star and grade 1 listed. The planners are really very hard over and not allowing any double glazing, even heritage double glazing in the village. And obviously this is counter to, you know, our greening campaign that we're running, as well as South Downs National Energy Reduction. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me that that these two policies aren't in step. You know, is there any chance of seeing some progress, please?
I think that's probably one for Amy.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, there is a policy in the local plan, I didn't mention there, that is specifically around mitigation measures in heritage buildings, and it's definitely a balance that needs to be kind of addressed in terms of conserving those heritage assets and incorporating measures to make them more energy efficient. So I don't know the details of your particular village. Were you looking at potential for wood double glazing or using different materials that could be?
Well, that's right. Heritage double glazing is timber and is almost invisible, but even that is not allowed for double glazing. And you know, you might as well just put a bin liner up instead of the glass, to be honest, for the amount of energy that is wasted. So it doesn't seem to be there's any movement. You know, there are plenty of, you know, entirely acceptable alternatives available. I'll be ever so grateful.
It's a good point, Paul, and I think all I can say is we pushed our policies as far as we could for the last local plan. We have a review coming up. I think we're learning as we go. We know there's a lot more work we can do. I think it's something we will have to address through policy, because I think it is inconsistent. And you know, I'm not a planner. I can't really speak on behalf of my planning colleagues, but I am trying to encourage them to make this part of a two-way dialogue, so that if you like, the work we're doing through the community energy pilots can address how we develop our policy in future. So hopefully we will get to the stage where we can support good schemes and good design.
Thank you.
Can I just very quickly cover? Sorry, it's Chris Patterson from the South Downs National Park Authority in response to Paul Hambledon. Paul, I understand we're still working on the village design statement, and I know that the Hambledon Parish Council pushed our conservation officers quite hard on a couple of the design guidelines in there, and I think we pushed back. But I have raised this point internally with our two conservation officers, and I think, as Chris Fairbrother said earlier, this is something we'll be looking at in the review of our local plan policies.
That'd be terrific. Thank you.
Just before we go on to Tom Broughton's question, also Sue Fleming from Lewis has commented in the chat box about how she's managed the, Lewis is a conservation area, about how they've managed insulation and things. So it might be worth having a conversation with Sue Fleming at Transition Town Lewis, or just chat with her in the chat box. Can we move on to Tom Broughton, please?
Yeah, hi. I'm based in Chichester, and the Chichester District Council have asked me to set up a renewable energy working group. And so I've been working on targets, and I noticed the Climate Change Committee's sixth carbon budget report published just before Christmas proposed 85 gigawatts of solar and 30 gigawatts of wind, onshore wind, by 2050. So based on land area, that would mean the Chichester District's target would be 270 megawatts of solar and 95 megawatts of onshore wind. The South Downs National Park is actually 2/3 of the land area of the Chichester District. So what is the target for the South Downs National Park for those technologies?
We commissioned some work from Small World Consulting, which is about to report, which is looking at our, if you like, the carbon footprint for both the National Park Authority as an organisation, so our business continuity and operations, but also for the National Park as an area. Though we work closely with our local authorities, we're planning authority in our own right, we need to have an understanding about what carbon footprint exists within the national park across all the sectors. So that includes farming, forestry, and other areas of business as well. I think we need a better understanding about what the current carbon situation is, because the pressure, I think, on the national park, as I mentioned earlier, is also about nature-based solutions, because we have a big contribution to play in terms of carbon savings and carbon offsetting through restoring nature. So it is a balance. It's not all about community energy. Community energy certainly has a role to play, but we also have to look at nature-based solutions as well. And the national park will be a venue for that too. And certainly my discussions with district councils and local authorities around us, they are looking at the national park to fulfill that role.
I guess the Climate Change Committee's report also included sequestration from land-based technologies. So this, land is already being covered. So there is this other demand or proposal for energy generation. And I'm just thinking how much energy is going to be generated within the national park.
I think that would need to be a piece of work we did beyond the baselining. I'd need to understand what capacity we had. I think it would be useful to do that in the context of also understanding what constraints we have, because obviously, as we've mentioned before, we've got to balance that with our statutory purposes around landscape, biodiversity and cultural heritage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is from Derek Pryor, and then after Derek, it will be Jem Fryer.
Thank you, Liz. So this is Derek. Thank you for the great event. It's inspiring. Everything coming together is wonderful. I live in the north of Hampshire. I'm on a parish meeting, Stratfield Turgis. In our area, we've had some amazing proposals from greedy local farmers to put in huge solar installations in the most beautiful countryside. For example, one at Bunkers Hill, right next to the gorgeous River Whitewater. There are others in North Hampshire just like this. So my question is, for Hampshire County Council, surely in an area of such beauty, we desperately need sustainable and community energy projects. Is there a strategy for making sure that we locate these important projects in the best places?
I think I'm happy to tackle that one, as it's outside the park. So there are certain planning laws, with solar farms. One of the problems is where developers can connect, and the other one is where there is capacity on the grid. And I see there have been a couple of questions about capacity on the grid, and there are different authorities have different planning guidance around solar farms and impact and visual impact as well, assessments. My recommendation to you is reach out to the climate change team at Hampshire County Council and ask them for support as a parish, and also talk to other parishes within the parish network who may have dealt with solar farms, and because it's a lot to take on when a solar developer comes into your community, and to you know, so that you're informed, basically. But otherwise, it's a mix. You know, the country needs more renewable energy. For some of those sites, it's an income for farmers.
Yep.
And a lot of solar farms, I'll put a note in the chat. A lot of solar farms enhance the biodiversity, because the farm becomes dormant for 25 years, and they do enhanced planting and what have you. So it really is a balance. But I would reach out to the climate change team at Hampshire, and also see if you can get support as a parish council.
You haven't got any contacts, have you, Ollie? Names?
Mike Culver leads on the climate change work.
Yeah, I'll put his, that's right. I'll put his email address in the chat, or I'll send it to you directly. Sorry, what was your name again?
Derek Pryor.
Derek Pryor.
And also, just to say, we will be doing a masterclass with Hampshire Council in mid-May. We're just waiting to get the date set.
Yeah, we can bring that in as a theme, Liz.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Okay, so the next question is Jem Fryer, and then after Jem, it will be Adrian Court. So Adrian, do unmute yourself in advance.
Hi there. So I actually put in two questions. There was a brief one about EV charging, and was there a prerequisite that any electricity that was used for EV charging was just going to be coming from renewable sources to really support that change to sustainability? But the other thing I was going to ask about was, last year or year and a half ago, I was working with a council in Devon who were responding to Dartmoor National Park's local plan. Dartmoor National Park had declared a climate emergency, but had actually, when they brought out the plan, it hardly reflected it at all. So it was at that community response level, and we were challenging them about that. And what I noticed was they seemed to be very limited in what they could do because of the national park level planning restrictions. So they were partly restricted there, and they were also, I think, a little bit resistant to making big changes, and that the whole conflict between trying to conserve and also be more environmentally responsible. So I'm interested to know what your sense is of being able to change things at that national level to make it more representative of what we actually need to do in the limited time we've got.
I'll take that one if it's okay, Ollie.
Yes.
Yeah, Jem, I mentioned earlier that National Parks UK, so it's the Welsh and Scottish Parks as well, we've been working together on a climate change and energy group. I think there's a recognition that with the net zero targets, they're extremely challenging for national parks, and that inevitably that will have an impact on landscape. And we need to manage that quite carefully, but we do recognise we have a strong role to play. Landscapes do change over time, and the important thing is that we manage that so it essentially protects the special qualities of the parks. They are a national level designation. They are the crown jewels, if you like, of landscapes, along with the AONBs. We kind of want to maintain them at a level, you know, where we recognise that they are special places, but they do have a role to play in terms of the climate change challenge, be it adaptation at landscape scale, nature-based solutions, or community renewables or renewable energy. We recognise that, and that's part of a discussion about, well, you know, what are the national parks going to look like in future, and how do we guide that change and make an active contribution to the challenge.
So is there a way that we can support you with doing that, either at an individual or a council level?
I think there is. I mean, it's part of we're going to COP26 hopefully later in the year, if that actually runs, and we are promoting the notion of net zero with nature. That's the big concept from the national parks. But alongside that, it'll be a discussion around the nature of the national parks in the future. And you know, there's already been a question asked today about, well, what capacity the national parks have for renewables. In a lot of cases, that's a bit of an unknown. 10, 15 years ago, when large wind schemes were all the thing, there was a piece of work done regionally to look at the capacity for AONBs and national parks to incorporate wind energy. But the reality is those schemes didn't come forward. It's been offshore wind. And now it's more about solar and ground source. And so the technology is advancing and the approaches are slightly different to what was expected. But you know, it's a learning curve for us, really. And I think, yes, in a sense, we do need to support in that very active conversation about the role that national parks and AONBs can play to this. You know, part of my job is making sure that they're fit for the future. But, you know, as I said, we do have a role to play around meeting the climate change challenge.
Thank you. We've got 3 more minutes and then we're going to move on to Nicola's presentation about setting up an organisation. So I can't remember who I said was the next person to ask a question, but you're going to be the last question. I think that was Adrian Court. So Adrian, do you want to pose your
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I think I've partially got an answer to my question, but I am also a director of what we call a community-based water company, which has a project near Fareham. There is a developer who's going to be developing quite close to that same site. And my question really is, of course, developers are going to be encouraged to introduce the latest technology in terms of heating, et cetera, but that could well leave adjacent villages somewhat disadvantaged, if you like, because they're on the old system. And I just wondered if you see any trend towards developers embracing outlying villages, communities, to actually incorporate their own, let's say, more whizzy advanced technologies to extend, you know, out to those neighbouring communities. Whether you see that as a trend that might be encouraged.
Who's going to?
So, sorry, can I just clarify, Adrian? Sorry, you're saying whether around developers, and can you just clarify that? Sorry, your question. Oh, he's frozen.
Well, while he unfreezes, I'm going to be a strict timekeeper and suggest there are quite a few further questions that are rather interesting in the chat box. So I will put to our speakers, would you be okay to have a look at the questions and maybe answer them either during the rest of the session, or you could email some answers to us in the next day or two and we can send them out to the participants. I think that might be the best way forward.
Liz, can I, and I apologise to Adrian, didn't quite capture the end of the question, but there are, you know, around housing developments and, you know, there are community energy groups that are now supporting housing developments with microgrids and things like that. And I'm fascinated to hear more about your water project and how that.
You've fallen out of the call, Ollie.
No, okay, I'd just say, it was just really a comment from the chat.
Yeah.
You know, we're creating a network here, which is already there. Please, everybody, Community Energy South has a monthly newsletter. If you do have any items you want to raise with us in that newsletter or thoughts following this event, please contact us and we'll put it in the newsletter and join the newsletter. And it's a way of creating the debate and linking everyone up. So, and that can be questions as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ollie. We'll hand over to you now, Nicola.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris and Amy. That was a really good session, and we'll come back to a session with South Downs National Park after tea around SIL funding and you know, other opportunities. So so we're going to pass on to Nicola, who's a director of Made Energy, but one of our mentors at Community Energy South. Nicola, are you all set up?
I am. Thank you very much, Ollie and Liz. Great. I'll go ahead and share my screen now, sort myself out. Okay, slideshow. Oh, how do I make it not black around the edges?
Press slideshow in the middle.
Okay.
Down at the bottom in the middle. That
One.
one. Oh, no, better press that again.
I had it right earlier.
It was right earlier.
Press that one again.
Yeah, it's too small. Hold on. I'll try again.
Okay.
Oh, I had it right earlier. That's annoying.
Well, can everybody see it all right? Put your thumb up if you can see it all right.
Yeah, there's lots of
You're
thumb.
okay to go as like that, Nikki.
I'm going to do it like this. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk to you now about getting a new community energy group started, which is what we're doing within the mentoring scheme. So here's a great picture of loads of kids really enthusiastic about renewable energy. So it's a great one to start with.
Nicola, sorry, if you click on top left, file from beginning, you can see that slideshow.
Yep, it goes back again.
Oh, it goes back again. Okay, sorry.
Well, we had lots of thumbs up, so we can see it.
All right, I'll try again. Sorry about this. I did practice earlier and it was right.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. Use the one you like.
Okay, I'll just go to the next screen. Oh, it's not working now. I can't get my next screen.
Oh.
Who's great on PowerPoint?
If you go to the bottom right corner,
yeah,
there's another icon down there. You can try that, the right icon. Of course, I'm putting my mouse on it. I can't. That's it. Try that one.
Yeah, nothing's happening.
Maybe it's just frozen on your computer.
Perhaps I'll stop sharing again and I'll just have another go. I'll do it this way. Can you see it?
We can see it.
Thank you. Okay, so getting a new community energy group started. So the South Downs National Park Authority, as you know, have provided us with resources at CES to mentor and support the growth of a number of new groups to create a new renewable energy project. Now, we found some groups already had great ideas in mind, and others are now starting from scratch and consulting their community. So it's really good that they're starting to motivate people and demonstrate what they're interested in. And so through this mentoring, we're helping to establish where key groups want to go and how they'll do that. And the key requirements at such an early stage usually start with planning what that business model will be and articulating it so that others can understand it. And then it's about establishing a core group to do the hard work, a bit like Made Energy that I'm part of the director team to do over in Maidenhead. So that's ensuring a breadth of skill and a decent volunteer capacity. And lastly, it's about gaining the right legal structure to proceed. And I've got a couple of slides on that in a moment. So Ollie shared a slide similar to this one earlier, and it's a really useful one because it maps out the process, the most logical process to go through. It's a step-by-step process. So first of all, what is community energy? So it's important to consider this because you need to understand it and you need to be able to articulate how to understand it and bring others in. And then it's ensuring your community know that a local group can actually create and own community energy. It doesn't have to be something that a remote large corporate deals with entirely. Many of you are familiar with that already. And then it's about being clear about how your ideas and ambitions fit within the opportunities available to you. Then it's your starting point, gathering key people and networking with others, other groups that are established, other individuals, for example. And then creating your business plan and relevant action points to go from. Then number 6, consulting well with your community and bringing others in to lighten that load for you, to learn from and to help market the potential share offers if that's how you decide to go forward. and then having the right legal structure to be able to carry out your plan. And crucially, finding funding, such as a grant for feasibility study, getting local funding to build the infrastructure, and using SIL money as described. And Michael's going to touch on that to a greater extent later on. Then number 9, getting your project off the ground. There's lots of funding out there for the right projects. And at the end, case studies. Now that's at the end here, but also right at the start of your journey, as Ollie mentioned, look at other activities which are already succeeding. Try replicating those, joining them, growing them, and even just using their resources for you to make shortcuts in the activities you want to take. I think everyone's keen to share because we're all after the same objective in reducing carbon. So we provide mentoring support. Get my slides up. So our mentoring is happening in various places across the South, and we're being commissioned to help groups get off the ground, develop plans and find funding. Part of my job outside CES is also a fundraising consultant, as is Michael. So we think we're well placed to support the groups with mentoring. We're also commissioned in Hampshire, in Essex, and soon to be in other places. And if you can't get our mentoring directly, keep an eye on our website and check out the huge guidance document Ollie mentioned on our project pages. We're calling that a roadmap. So it's really good to take you along the journey that you're on. So why start a community energy group? Because you want to take local action to tackle climate change, perhaps improve local air quality and/or tackle fuel poverty. There are many reasons why you might want to start or get involved with community renewable energy. I mean, I'm personally keen to see more local green jobs appear and for people to get the opportunity as your future shareholder to part own energy generating equipment like solar or heat pumps. I don't have any renewables generation on my own home, but I, like many of you, own a very small slice of solar generation on 3 schools and 3 leisure facilities, saving carbon and saving those sites money. And I think that's a really good foundation for learning more about renewables. So you may want to see an economic benefit for your specific community. You may want to see energy produced locally and make your community more energy self-sufficient. And you may find that in your local geography, you've got a specific opportunity or a project that you want to develop. The next slide here is an example of how to create a core group and then seek wider skills and support later on. The key message here is don't go it alone. Don't look at creating community energy as something that's too big to manage. You want to create a core group of people, someone who might want to lead it, a chairperson, someone with energy or environmental experience who might want to project manage your initial project, someone who might want to support with administration, who could take the secretarial role, and then someone who's great at marketing. And later on, you can widen your group with people who might be keen to facilitate, maybe technical experts such as local engineers. You might want to bring in legal professionals if you happen to have someone in your local area who has those skills to lend. And then you've got local councillors and or officers with environmental and sustainability interests. And generally people who are interested and have time to spare, alongside someone who's really good at the figures. So it's all about starting off small if necessary and widening your group as you start to communicate more. But the key thing is don't go it alone and don't feel overwhelmed like it's all on your shoulders. I mentioned making a plan. Putting a business plan together is vital to achieve the well-planned action and long-term success of your ideas. So we've got some questions on this slide, starting with what's your vision and why do you want to make it happen? And the steps you need to take. Who are your key group and what are their roles? How will your projects be funded or create an income to create sustainability around it and longevity? And who can enable your group to be a success? And how you will engage your local community? And what's your action plan? What will you actually do? Who will do it and by when? I mentioned having someone in the group who's great at marketing. So that communication side is going to be really key to involve everyone and get people excited about what you're doing. And next is getting incorporated. To secure project funds and income, you will need to be an established legal entity and have a bank account. So you'll need a business plan in place first to get to that stage. Now, community energy companies are usually cooperative societies or community benefit societies known as CBS. Community interest companies, CICs, are also another legal structure. And I've got a brief overview of each provided overleaf to help you to work out what's best for you. There's a really good explanation on legal structures on the Hive, which is a support programme by Co-ops UK. This slide here is really great. You can see here all the UK legal forms useful for co-ops. I want to draw your attention to where you see both the little colourful icon, which demonstrates where a legal organisation can issue public shares to the public, and where there's an asset lock. And you'll see over there on the far right, a community benefit society. They're the most common forms. And that's what Made Energy is, and many other co-ops that are community energy companies. And that's really important, because if the asset is locked for community benefit, you're more likely to be able to get people to invest. It feels more secure. And what that means is if the company was to wind down in the near or far future, those assets must be transferred to another organisation with similar objectives and a similar asset lock. But it's really worth looking at the Hive resource. So in the South Downs National Park, the support available is the Community Energy Pathway Guidance document that I mentioned. We call it the roadmap. That's on our website, and Ollie shared a link to that earlier. Then the masterclass, which you're taking part in today. And for 5 lucky groups within the South Downs National Park, we're offering First Steps business support, which is just to help them analyse their capability and get on the right track. And a smaller number of them who are sort of business ready are receiving business support, which we call Next Steps. And that's about helping them develop a business plan and with all good intentions to create a funding application to get them started. And I think that's the end of my slide. Yes, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola. We're tight on time, but we've got time for maybe one question.
One question. We've got a minute, and I'm very keen to everyone has a tea break before the next session, Liz.
Yeah.
Have you got?
There's no obvious questions that have come up in the chat box. So if you've got a question, wave madly and we'll, oh no, it looks like there are, right. There's a question from Jeff Barnard and a question from Angie. Jeff says, how long do core officers need to realistically commit to a CES group? And Angie says, what are the standard rules for registering as a CBS?
Okay.
Well, Nicola, maybe you could take number 2, but number 1 to Jeff Barnard. So at the moment, where we are with the pathways is that we're supporting 5 core groups. So through the process, but like Chris Fairbrother mentioned, you know, we're going to review that. So if you have got projects or groups that you want us to support you
it's
on,
a different question, Ollie. What I'm getting at is finding committed people is quite a big challenge, especially if you're going for people who maybe recently retired. And community energy is probably a 25-year-old, 25-year-long commitment. Do your core people really need to be there for the long term? Because that makes it quite a big ask.
Very good. So Jeff, that's why we're supporting groups to do business plans. Within the business plan, you should really be looking that, you know, you're doing this for your community. Once the business plan's in place, then there should be, you should be able to pass it on to others and not feel that one person can lead on this. And we're very strong on that. And so particularly, there's a word for it, isn't there? And is that don't think that this is something you're going to see through all the way. at some point you need to pass it over, because these are long-term projects, and a good community energy project takes 2.5 to 3 years to develop, you know, a good scale one, and it needs time to do that. So it's just a consideration. Some can go a lot quicker, but hopefully, you know, embed that in your business plan. Thanks, Jeff. I got that.
I'll just pick up quickly about standard rules. Standard rules for community benefit societies are ones that are approved by the FCA, and there are about 7 or so organisations which provide them, including COPS UK, which I generally regard as the best one to start at, really. But there are others available.
Great. So I'm going to put up on. Thank you very much, Michael. I'm going to put up on the screen the next session. We start again at 11:25. If everyone wants to go and get a cup of tea, and I'll leave this session up on the screen.
Yeah, and if you want to stay and chat, do so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Liz and Ollie, just to say, I've been going through and answering some of the questions, but for some reason, it's only doing it as private responses to the questionnaire.
Oh.
It's not been responding to everybody, so not everybody can see the responses I've put in.
Click, so when it goes send,
it was only offering me either to respond to a person in question or everybody, but it wasn't tying it to the. How do I explain this?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. Yes, yeah, you can't kind of tag the question in the answer. No, you can't.
No. So it wasn't clear who you were answering. So
yes,
I've done my best.
Thank you very much. I might still get you to send the answers out to everyone, because often when people, it is. I know it's the downside of Zoom that you can't tag the question, but. Often people like to see, everybody likes to see the answers, because we all learn.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and see if I can do that.
Chris, it's Chris.
You can
Patterson.
cut and paste.
Yeah, I have done that, Chris Fairbrother. I've actually extracted all the questions which were specifically aimed at the South Downs National Park Authority, and I'll put them in a Word document. I'll circulate that after the masterclass.
Okay, well, I've drafted some responses already, so we'll tidy that up. Okay, thanks, Chris.
Hi, it's Matt Brown from Brighton Energy Corp here. There was something that came to mind just towards the end there that I thought I'd, seeing as we're all sitting around, I'd just sort of raise. So we've done a couple of projects where we've sort of provided our sort of financial backbone to help other groups sort of get a project off the ground. And I wondered whether this was something, you know, that we could be doing here, because obviously you're offering mentoring help and that kind of thing. But, you know, obviously we're also in a bit of an emergency situation in terms of climate, and today's news, especially with regards to increased coal usage globally. And I just wondered whether it was something that would be of use to new groups in order to speed up what they're trying to do. The deathly silence.
There was. Sorry, I was trying to respond to somebody else that had messaged me privately, so I missed your question, and I wonder if everybody else has too.
Oh, okay. Maybe they have. Maybe they
name a person that you're asking the question to.
Well, okay, so it was, I guess, to Ollie and Chris Fairbrother, you know, it was really just in relation to the session we've just done and talking about people, obviously in the South Downs Park area, setting up community energy groups. Just that we've done a few projects with other early, you know, startup community energy groups to use our sort of leverage with raising money to help them get projects off the ground quickly, which is obviously something that needs to happen at the moment.
Absolutely. And what we want to try and do, sorry, Matt, I was responding to a lady called Rachel Coxcoon, who's just presenting in the next session, to say that she's on it. Matt, listen, there's a big space in this for us to match make new groups with the existing groups like Brighton Energy Co-op.
Yeah.
Look at that. And I think that as we go through the pathways, by July time, we will sit down with all the Chris's at South Downs National Park and look at it and see probably a bigger strategy for the South Downs National Park.
Yeah, so definitely listening to it, just thought that it just sounded like the Chris's have got an idea of getting together an idea of what could be done.
Exactly. Well, that's what this is all about.
Community energy groups are going to be a part of that.
Yeah.
But often they've got to get into a situation where they can raise that money, start raising money, and we're in that position. It's we can be raising money and helping that happen. We're quite aware of that, and so it might be when you're a bit further down the line with the strategy that we can practically go, okay, look, we need to get this much money, and
that'd be very useful. I think it is an early stage for us. We are stepping into this space quite anew, and even with we've got existing relationships with the counties and the districts, mainly about planning. This is a new relationship. It's a slightly different area of work. We're starting to develop those networks a bit more for us. And I think there's plenty of scope in the future for joint commissioning with some of the districts and counties, or working collaboratively with the county authorities on targets, metrics, capacity studies. There's all sorts of stuff I think we can step up to do, but we're not quite there yet. I think in a sense, I think people are going to have to be a little bit patient. I think that's the direction of travel I feel we will go as an authority, and we will need to take our members along with us. But I do feel that sense of being able to jointly commission and work with our local authority partners is very important. And until last year, I mean, the local authorities get all the national level carbon data, all the BHESCO data. They get it cut to their authority boundary. We don't get that, and we only got it for the first time about 8 months ago. So we're not even on the same footing. So we're, if you like, trying to catch up on some elements of the carbon discussion, whereas other elements of it, like nature recovery and nature-based solutions, we might be a little bit ahead of the game and can offer support to local authority partners.
Yeah. Okay. I just thought it was something I'd raise. So.
No, thanks. And Matt, I suppose at the moment, what we're trying to do is get information to the communities. And also create a network so that we can all, tie together and things like that, and then look at the wider opportunities. Other areas that we're looking at is that we're talking to the authorities about is, community municipal bonds, when you merge community finance with local authority finance and other opportunities like that. So, but there will definitely be opportunity to link in with Brighton Energy Co-op, BHESCO, Ovesco, WINAC in Winchester, and bring all this expertise together.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I mean, it just seems that we just have to use all tools available, don't we, at the moment? So
yeah. And,
I'm going to grab a biscuit.
Yeah, good idea. I put the kettle on, but I'm going to ask Nicki Myers if she can, if I stop sharing, if I can, are you there, Nicki? Nicki's
yes.
The first session sort of after tea on transitioning rural properties to oil and renewables. And Nicki's project managing Ovesco's community heat project with UK Power Networks. And so hopefully you're ready to rock and roll, Nicki.
Hopefully I am, yes. Thank you very much, Ollie. Hello, everybody. I work for Ovesco, and as Ollie said, I work on the community heat project, which is in Barkham. And I'll go through a bit of background to the project and then tell you about the project, and hopefully you'll have some questions as well. So let me just share my screen, share my presentation. Bear with me. Right, okay, so we call our project, which comes out of Community Heat, a pathway to net zero. And here are our partners, UK Power Networks and Borough Happold, who are an international engineering company and who work as the hub of the project, really collating the information and modelling it. And I'll talk some more about that in a bit. So I work for Ovesco, and Ovesco are working on the ground with this project. Ovesco has been going since 2007 and stands for Ouse Valley Energy Service Company. It's a CIC, referring back to Nicola's structures. It's a community group run for the local community of Lewes and the surrounding area, and we're based in East Sussex. We're best known for raising a community share offer to fund solar PV panels on Harvey's Brewery, and that was back in 2011. And we've gone on to raise more for solar PV projects on local schools, especially. Our vision is to see 100% of our local energy supply to come from renewables. So we aim high. And we are, as I said, we're the coordinating function on the ground for Communiheat in Barkham. Now, we just wanted to show you a little bit about the electricity network, because it's quite crucial to what's happening with this project. In the past, the electricity energy supply was a centralised linear supply when we got started over a decade ago. And much of that energy, as we know, came from fossil fuels, from coal, gas, some nuclear, and a little bit of hydro. So the national grid look after the high voltage side of it, and the DNOs, the district network operators, look after the low voltage side. And in our region in the southeast, UK Power Networks has that function, and they provide the electricity to homes and to workplaces. And as soon as it kind of hits the fabric, if you like, of your building, then it becomes the utility companies who look after it. But this structure is changing, and it's becoming decentralized as we decarbonize, which means that the role of the DNOs is changing to those of DSOs, distribution system operators. And this is due to solar PV. 1 million homes now have solar PV in the UK. Wind, offshore, battery, hydro, and other forms of local generation. And of course, we've got EV chargers thrown in here as well, which will complicate the grid. And as we change over to electric heating, low carbon electric heating, we're going to have to look, well, the DNOs, now DSOs, will have to manage the grid in a different way. So now we come to the Communiheat project. And the challenge, Barkham is off gas, it has no mains gas, and many of the houses are on oil. And the challenge is, how do you take those houses off oil? The Clean Growth Strategy is committed to phase out fossil fuel heating in new existing houses in the next 10 years. So the project is looking to see how we do that. And we're very lucky, we have a very supportive district council, Lewes District Council, committed to net zero by 2030. Although the project isn't about electric cars, obviously we are looking to keep that in mind in our project. So now we come to Barkham. Ovesco has been working with Barkham, the residents of Barkham, for about 10 years and have done previous large studies there. So we know that 77% of the village use oil for heating. The village has 175% above national average energy use. 23% of the houses use night storage heaters. There's a large percentage of the houses that are old, pre-1870, 25%, which gives its own problems, as we've already discussed, with listed houses and so forth. And the average energy bill is also higher than the national average. And I think that Barkham is quite a typical off-gas village. So this type of pattern of figures of stats is replicated throughout the country. So here we are with Communiheat, our project. And we are looking with UK Power Networks as our partner and with Borough Happold crunching the numbers, as it were. We're looking at how an unplanned versus a planned approach to exiting from fossil fuel heating would look for Barkham, given that the grid is constrained and will need to be strengthened for both electric heating and for electric cars, for electric car charging. So we're looking to see if a planned approach is the optimal way forward for the village. As Ovesco, as we are involved, we are also interested in local ownership, local generation and resilience for the village as well. So here's a bit of detail about Communiheat. So we're basically, we're surveying 200 of the houses to give a heat loss calculation. We're putting almost 50 into 50 houses, monitoring for the heating and electricity use. So we can really get some detailed figures of what actually happens, how people really use their houses. We're also collating all the other information that's available, EPCs, all the prior information from our previous projects. And we're gathering all that together and handing it over on an anonymized basis to Borough Happold, who will then produce a digital twin of the village, along with all the information that they're gathering from UK Power Networks. And this, we understand, is very is practically a unique thing that they're doing, and we'll be able to simulate the village and see how the village will work under different scenarios. And we'll look to see whether the planned approach is really the best way to go, and also to develop new ways to allow rural communities to reduce their emissions. We'll be looking at a variety of ways of doing this, whether it's a district heating system, system for some parts of the village, air source heat pumps, ground source, see if there's any hydro, local generation to see where there's places where PV can be put, whether it's on rooftops, and so forth, and even see if there's any wind that can be put in. The project's running for a year, and it's funded by NIA funding, and we're very much hoping that it's obviously just the first step in decarbonising. So this is the visualisation map that Borough Happold will produce. This is not Barkham, this is a different village, which they haven't done in such detail. Oh no, sorry, it is Barkham. This is their first draft of it. And this is there's going to be immense detail on here. And this will just kind of show you what we can expect from them. So this is our roadmap for Communiheat, that we aim to understand how rural communities can switch to low carbon heating using electricity in a way which ensures comfort, affordability, and a smooth transition. So we're looking to use Barkham Energy Group, which is already set up as an investment vehicle to support funding, to establish a local trusted installation network, because from what we see, people just don't know where to turn first. And obviously, there's a barrier in terms of the cost of the new technology. So we're looking to see how that can be extended to householders. We're looking at local energy bill tariff, time of use, flexing, trading with local markets. And also all the time we're looking to support the more vulnerable in our community. And then obviously, you know, the next steps, we're going to be writing the book on how we do this, so we can share it with other off-gas communities. So that this is a prototype, if you like, and we're wanting to roll this out and to share it with other off-gas communities in the area, as well as to see what obviously the next steps for Barkham is. We've developed a website, which is communiheat.org, which is being updated all the time. There's a section for Barkham where there's local events, but you'll also see the other things that are happening as well. We have a dedicated email address, which is communiheat@ovesco.co.uk. Ovesco's website, of course, and do call us. That's the landline number at Ovesco. Thank you very much. There we go.
Thanks very much, Nikki. Well, really good timing, because we've got some time for questions. Liz, I don't know if you've seen any questions. We're just from Peter Kerno-Ford. Peter, would you like to ask your question to Nikki about solar thermal?
Yes, thank you, Ollie. Thank you, Nikki, for an excellent presentation. I've screen captured a couple of those slides that have been useful for where we are in East Hampshire with aged properties, etc. Yeah, in all the discussions, lots of comments and use of solar electricity, PV, and so on, but not solar thermal. So we had the chance to build our own house back in 2013-14 and put both up on the roof. Out of the PV and the solar thermal is the best investment we've ever made. So as an example, even in winter, deepest, darkest winter, not even this winter, but 2 winters ago when it's extremely cold, we were still getting in excess of 60 degrees centigrade on a hot sunny day in the middle of winter. This winter it's been over 80 degrees C. So most of our underfloor heating is supplied from solar thermal during the winter when there is sun out. During the summer, which could be from May through to end of September, all of our hot water pretty much comes from solar thermal. So we don't have to use electricity or use gas. So for all those people who are actually looking at villages and where they have to put projects in and they have access to rooftops, I would seriously look at solar thermal. It does mean using a 350 or 250 or 500 litre water tank and a couple of pumps and so on, but it is a great investment. Pays back so many times quicker than PV, and obviously gives you a nice warm home and some hot water. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Pete. I completely agree with what you're saying. I've lived with solar thermal myself, and I just loved it. But and there's a long list of renewables that will be taken into account, which I didn't go into in much detail within our project. But what we have to ensure is that the grid is enough, that the grid can cope if everybody wants to be electric. So there'll be people who may choose to go for biomass, people who will put up solar thermal, which will be great. But our project is not a prescriptive project to tell everybody to move onto air source heat pumps. But we have to have a grid that supports that, and that's what UK Power Networks is interested in, is what the best planned route is. So yes, there will be some solar thermal within the mix, because that will probably be part of the best planned route. But it's great to hear that you're such a supporter of solar thermal. I think it's great myself.
Nikki, thank you for that. And just as a couple of other comments, yeah, we looked at both ground source, because we have a sufficient area to actually put it in, but the capital expenditure was rather too high. We also looked at air source, And when we looked at air source, we did this off the back of the 2010 snow and the sustained temperatures at -5, -10, where the air source heat pumps are at a 1-to-1 efficiency. So you're actually putting more stress on the grid network at that point. So if you can actually de-stress the grid network, I put a mitigation strategy in place, yeah, sure, it does help a lot. And I think because it's great planning for current winters at the moment, but as we know now that we're actually getting divergence between summer and winter. So yeah, there will be greater strain, and given the, yeah, as you know, the EV penetration, which is why on our climate change network, we're considering whether we actually do hydrogen as part of the mix, and use that for some of the local transport, including the voluntary transport for taking people to hospitals and doctors and so on.
Excellent. So can I, Nikki, would you mind if I could just add a little bit from?
Yeah, sure.
I think that one other thing that I've observed from community is that you're looking at the supply chain, and that's really important for a community to understand, you know. So if you've got, let's say, 100 homes, and you know you've got the potential for 100 solar thermal installations, then is there the supply chain to support with that? And is there a group buying opportunity? So I think that's one thing that community from an observation is looking at, and also looking at the supply chain for, you know, have air source heat pump companies at the moment can kind of handpick their projects. You know, there needs to be a big skills uppage, and so that's one thing that's really important. But also, I believe that community is also measuring the weather. So it's in the simulation of the village, actually taking on future weather impact on the grid. So they're preparing for that. Good. So we've got probably time for another question.
Yeah, one more question.
Is anyone out there?
There seem to be a lot of questions about solar thermal going on.
Yes, I'm not surprised.
There's a question from Jeff Barnard about the costings and whether transition is possible for most people without special grants and subsidies.
Do you want to answer that, Ollie?
Can you ask your question, Jeff? Sorry,
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really, really exciting to see this. And I think that concept of the community-wide approach as being potentially much, much more cost efficient than going individual households going it alone. But I just wonder whether you're heading down an avenue that's going to open up to be financially viable, or whether it's actually heading down a dead end where the economics are going to be problematic.
Absolutely. But I think the whole idea of the community project is to look at what the need is, and then talk to the local authorities and government and say, you know, here is a community with all the data and information on it, and the need is, you know, 1,000 homes to do this, but the market isn't supporting it. So until we put those needs case to the government and to the local authorities, then, you know, and capture the information, then you know, then we can argue that case, and that's the important thing. The market
is that your gut feeling at the outset, that actually this is the challenge, is to come up with a really watertight case for this to change policy?
So we've been yes, and also, you know, the Green Homes Grant has fallen through. You know, I've had somebody come to me on the Green Homes Grant on his knees, a grown man wanting to go to the police to report the government. You know, he's got to that stage with the Green Homes Grant, and then it obviously fell through. You know, there are other solutions. The community energy solution offers finance solutions for that, but we've also talked to Sussex Credit Union about a low interest loan, or other green banks where they can provide low interest loans. So, you know, that's maybe one of the routes.
Okay, we've got a couple more interesting questions, but which we might have. I'd ask if maybe Nicola or Ollie could answer in the chat box, because it's time to move on to Kayla's presentation about Plumpton College and planning in the South Downs National Park.
Fantastic. Are you there, Kayla?
I am indeed, Ollie. Thank you.
Hi.
If you could give me permission to share my screen.
Oh, you should be able to, Kayla, unless you've left the call and rejoined. Let's have a
I
look.
did, yeah. I left
Oh, you
the
did?
call and I rejoined. I had
Okay,
another.
I've got to find you now.
Okay. Anyway, what a pleasure. What a great turnout for this event. Well done, guys. And yeah, I'm really happy to discuss our experiences working with South Downs National Park and getting planning permission.
Be able to share your presentation. Oh, you're sharing it.
Yes. Yes. Okay, great. So yeah, my name is Kayla Ente, and I'm the founder and CEO of Brighton and Hove Energy Services Cooperative. We were founded in 2013 and we started our first projects in 2015. So it's kind of aligned with what Ollie was saying on the average amount of time to get a project up and running. And it's also difficult to get your first project going. That's our biggest challenge in community energy, is getting those first projects going so that we can establish a track record and really start to get things moving. At BHESCO, we have developed 57 projects, of which we own and operate 50 of those. About a third of those are heat projects. So we own and operate 2 air source heat pumps, 1 SunAmp heat storage system, and now 1 ground source heat pump system, where we've completely decarbonized a school in East Sussex. I have some things to say as follow-up on the community heat, because we've been involved in a project in a village outside of Lewis called Firle for the last 3 years. And we've gotten very far in the development of that heat network, and it is very much a problem with the low voltage network in our communities. Decarbonizing heat is a huge challenge in rural communities. It's going to be prohibitive. The costs will be prohibitive of reinforcing the low voltage network in the 2,500 rural communities in England. And so we really are going to, it's really good that we're doing the community heat project and getting that data, because we are going to have to make a big case to government to support the decarbonization of communities that are off the gas grid, where oil pollution or air pollution from burning oil is quite high, and carbon emissions as well. So I will talk about that a little bit later on in this presentation, but this is really about Plumpton College. This is a beautiful picture of what you can see of our solar arrays from the top of the South Downs. If you've ever been to the South Downs in the area around Plumpton and Brighton, then you'll see this view of our 2 solar arrays. We have about 97 kilowatts on 2 roofs. One of them is the winery building, and one is the farm building for the college. We installed them, we got them installed right before lockdown last year, which was a pretty incredible feat, because we also, as we all know, were under pressure to get the feed-in tariff and get those projects finalized which we did right before the gun. Both of those arrays have generated 105,000 kilowatt hours in a year on 97 kilowatts. So that is pretty good performance on those systems. And so with the application to the planning at South Downs National Park, we engaged an architect to act as the planning official for this application. And so we submitted the drawings and all of the information that was required by the South Downs National Park. And after we answered questions about glare, and you could see there's no glare coming from those panels, I actually think that it's a beautiful feature in the landscape that we can demonstrate zero carbon solutions in a rural community that it's empowering. It's very empowering for the people who see this to know that a significant amount of the electricity that is generated for Plumpton College is clean electricity. And of course, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We're all interested in reducing carbon emissions. But it's an important message to the people who are not like-minded, that they can see that you can do both. You can generate savings for the customer. Plumpton College will be saving about £4,000 a year on this solar array that we own and operate on their behalf. So it makes economic sense, it makes environmental sense. It's really a no-brainer for the college, and it also is aligned with what they do. They are a agricultural biodiversity college. They've been around for hundreds of years. And so this is a great example of community energy at work. The other one I really wanted to talk about as well is the issues that we came across working with South Downs National Park on the Furl heat networks. In the village, we started a pilot project. We did a RCEF stage 1 feasibility on the entire village. There's about 78 properties in the village. And we did a design, a heat network design in that village. And we, at the end of the stage 1, we presented it to the landlords, and we got permission to pursue the development of 25 properties in one part of the village. So we got stage 2 RCEF funding to do that. And we set off and designed the heat pump, the heat network for that part of the village. And it's the case very similar to what Community Heat is doing. We did the heat load calculations. We pursued a fabric first approach. So we recommended the energy efficiency measures that would need to be done to get all of these properties. And there were 3 listed properties. So 18th century properties that we recommended, as well as a Church of England primary school, which is a 19th century building, and the rest of the buildings, which are primarily 19th century tile hung properties, where we were able to get all of them up to an EPC level of C. We presented our results to the landlord on a fabric first approach, and we've got final permission to do the energy efficiency improvements and the installation of heat pumps on only 7 of those 25 properties, which is naturally a pity for us in some ways. However, the important thing to mention here is the fact that the reinforcement cost, the quote that we received from UKPN for those 25 properties was £90,000. That was the cost that they expected us as the developer to pay for upgrading the low voltage network to the point where we could connect the heat pumps. And this presents a very, very serious barrier to the uptake of renewable heat in rural communities. And also the second thing that is super important to this presentation is, and what you can see in this picture is in the picture on the left, there's the oil tank in the garden and a lovely water butt. The thing is that the landlord didn't need to get permission from South Downs National Park to install that oil tank. However, we had to get permission to install the enclosures for the heat pumps. And the example of what the enclosure would look like is there on the right. From South Downs National Park as part of our planning application. And also, because we were doing multiple properties in the original plan of 25 properties, they considered it a major development, which meant that we would have to do everything that a developer would have to do when they're developing a new community. So even though it was in the built environment, we were making changes that were going to significantly improve the air quality in the South Downs National Park, make a significant contribution to reducing carbon emissions. We were still at risk of being assessed at major development. And the reason why I'm saying at risk is because our scope got reduced, as you know, to 7 properties. So we didn't have to take it through, thank God, to with the 25 properties, because I think that the costs, if you add the reinforcement costs and the planning costs, it would have been prohibitive to our project. So the important message that I'm trying to bring across today is we have got to be able to communicate with one voice as developers, because that's basically what we are, community energy groups, to local authorities, to planning authorities, to central government about the challenges that we're seeing in reaching net zero. Community energy plays a major role in our approach to net zero. It's going to be a major part of net zero, primarily because one of the biggest barriers to net zero is the uptake of clean energy, people's resistance, their fear of the technology, their resistance because of the economics. Our experience is that most people won't choose renewable energy unless you make the economics work for them. And so we have enough barriers in our way. We need to open the pathway to be able to do these kinds of developments. And well, I'm hoping that the message is loud and clear to South Downs National Park that we really do need to work together to reduce air pollution and improve the quality of life for people living in the park and in our rural communities. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kayla. 2 great projects there and taking it through planning, and I'm sure South Downs National Park are following closely. We are right, we're dot on time. We've probably got time for one very quick question while I ask our next speaker to line up your presentation, Jess. So has anybody got a question for Kayla?
There were a couple of questions. I think there was a question from Dinah about who paid for the initial survey in Firle.
Okay, and then very quickly, so we hold on that question for a moment for Dinah. Chris, did you have You put your hand up, Chris.
Oh yeah, just to, I spoke to Kayla earlier on today, just to acknowledge, we're not getting everything right, and we're aware that our planning policies aren't squared with the challenge that we all face. We've already said in the local plan review, we will look at community renewables. We need to get this right. We need to not be throwing up unnecessary barriers. We do need to balance that out with our statutory purposes, obviously, but we feel, as you outlined in your presentation, Kayla, that can be done in a way that is sympathetic to the landscape. So yeah, it's an unfortunate example of where we didn't get it right, but I think we are keen to engage with community energy, and the community energy pathway project that we've been working on with Community Energy South is an example of where we are wanting to establish a two-way dialogue on this. So we're learning.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. Good to hear. And we need to have pioneers coming forward, and BHESCO are certainly a shining example of a pioneering company, and they're based right here in the southeast.
So if I may answer the question about the cost of the assessments in the beginning. I didn't say this, but we partnered with Warmer Sussex, which was an initiative by Retrofit Works, who are leaders in retrofitting older properties. They're based in London. They're also a cooperative. And it was an example of working cooperatively with other cooperatives to serve the local community. So part of the Warmer Sussex program was the offering of energy surveys at a significantly discounted price, which we offered to the landlord, and the landlord took up. So they paid for those assessments themselves.
Great, thank you very much, Kayla. Thank you. So our next speaker is Jess Riches.
Hello, hi. Give me a second and I will share my screen.
So Jess, you're going to cover community infrastructure levy.
I am indeed, yes. Bear with me. Lovely. Can everyone see the screen?
Yep, can see you.
Fantastic, thank you. So my name is Jess Riches, and I'm a planning officer for the South Downs National Park Authority. I sit on the major projects team in the planning department, and I deal with the community infrastructure levy funding side of things. So I just wanted to first introduce you to what SIL is and its role within the community.
All right, lovely.
Oh,
yeah.
I think someone needs to go on mute. But SIL is a charge or a tax on new development, which is used to help sustainable growth in the community by funding infrastructure projects. So the South Downs National Park Authority introduced and started charging SIL on new development in 2017. So all planning permissions since then have been assessed and, if applicable, have paid a SIL charge or contribution. So at this point in time, I just wanted to mention Section 106 briefly. Section 106 used to be the old charge that was charged on planning permissions previously. There was a plan to phase it out, and now there is a plan to use them in combination. So the Section 106 remains to help planning permissions themselves to fund infrastructure within the site, and SIL is used to fund infrastructure projects outside of the site itself. So the SIL that we collect obviously has to be used in line with the SIL regulations. So it can be used on a variety of infrastructure projects. Now the definition of infrastructure obviously is quite wide ranging, but you can see some of the core categories on the screen that give you an idea of what types of things would be applicable for SIL funding. Energy projects are indeed infrastructure, and so this will be fairly easy for most of your projects coming forward, but obviously just a rule of thumb, it tends to be things that are tangible and permanent. So when we get SIL income in, we distribute it as per the SIL regulations again. So the first 5% of the funds that we receive are allowed to be taken by the South Downs National Park for admin costs. So that's things like staff costs, monitoring sites, processing paperwork. It's quite heavy on that. So that's the first amount of money that kind of almost gets sent to the South Downs. The next portion of money is the neighbourhood portion, and that's given directly to the parish councils where money was collected from. So you'll note that there's a 15% or 25% of the income provided, and we'll go through this particular element on the next slide. The remainder of the funds are then held and distributed by the South Downs National Park Authority through what we call the Infrastructure Business Plan, or IBP for short. So you can see there that the remainder is all to fund IBP projects. So groups and organisations can bid for this money for their project each year, which we'll be discussing in more detail in a bit. So in essence, there are kind of two main streams of funding that are available to community infrastructure projects through SIL, the neighbourhood portion and the IBP projects. So firstly, the neighbourhood portion is given directly to parish councils every April and October of each year. So the amount of funding received depends on whether a neighbourhood development plan is in place at the time that planning permission is granted. So if a plan is in place, 25% of the funds that are collected by the South Downs are then given back to the parish. If the parish does not have a neighbourhood development plan in place, the amount given to the parish council is 15%. But it's important to note that this 15% figure is also capped at £100 per dwelling. So smaller parishes may be capped at 8%, for example, depending on how many dwellings are in the parish. So the parish council can spend the funds as they choose, as long as it provides infrastructure. The key difference between the South Downs National Park IBP projects and the neighbourhood portion amount is that there's more scope to allow things like affordable housing contributions, for which the IBP projects aren't allowed to do. So there's a little bit more remit for parish councils to choose what is needed in their area. So as you can appreciate, whilst getting funding by applying for the IBP project is a larger portion and is available, it's always useful to check in with the parish council, as they may have received some funding themselves. So that's quite a key bit of information, is to get in contact with them when you're starting to look for funding, and let them know that you've got something in the pipeline potentially that you want to kind of allocate funding for your project. So the remainder of the funds, as we spoke about, is then distributed by the South Downs through what we call the IBP. Now, the IBP is a document which sets out how much money has been collected, what amounts have been given to the parishes, and what has been spent to date. It also includes the recommendation every year of what projects have been selected for funding. And this document and recommendation gets sent to a planning committee where it is agreed and approved in principle, to then go on for the next year to fund further projects. So the document's updated on a yearly basis, and the South Downs aim to allocate all of the money every financial year to projects. There are obviously different authorities that do it slightly differently, where they potentially build up their amount and only start to allocate funds once they've got to an appropriate amount. But because we tend to deal with a smaller amount in South Downs, we allocate all of the funds every single year. So I just wanted to touch on the fact that SIL is a highly competitive fund in the South Downs, and this is evidenced by the high volume of projects received every year. At the moment, we have over 400 projects requesting tens of millions of pounds. And at the moment, we, to put this into perspective, the total amount of funding available each year is far less than that, with the previous financial year seeing just over £1.5 million available to allocate. so, you know, all in all, SIL will never be able to bridge the infrastructure deficit in full. And so this is why the SDNPA have a process in place to allocate the funding fairly. And that's through the IBP kind of process that we do, and the document that we provide. And it's why, you know, making sure that your bid addresses all of the key items that we'll be going through is really important, so that you can hit those high scores in your in the prioritisation process. So in very crude terms, the South Downs have three main steps to project allocation. The first is essentially, is it fit for SIL funding? Is it infrastructure? So we first go through a big long list, and we make sure that it is actually infrastructure. And just to note, we do get lots of requests for funds for feasibility work, but obviously this isn't strictly infrastructure that we can fund. So unfortunately, those wouldn't pass the first step of our project allocation process. The second process, category of projects. So here we deal with service providers and county councils, and we discuss what the general needs are in terms of what services are needed at the moment, what infrastructure projects are highly likely to restrict development growth, etc. So all of that is that all of those projects are put into certain categories to begin with. And then the step 3 is the project's scoring. So they're under the scoring themselves is undertaken by the major projects team in the national park. We use a prioritisation matrix, which can be found in the appendices of the IBP, and I'll be going through that in more detail in a second. So here we go. So in the prioritisation matrix, there are a range of key elements for your project that will need to be addressed to score highly. So you'll be able to find the weightings that we allow within the IBP appendices as well. So that's always a good place to start. It would be useful to go through our local plan and our partnership management plan and indicate your bid which aims and policies are being addressed by your project. But obviously, if you've got planning permission, you've probably already had a look at that. One of the main assessment weightings is the relationship to the local plan. One of the main ways SIL can help sustainable growth is to provide infrastructure which relates to or is close to a new development. So if you are planning a project, it'd be really useful to know if there are any new developments that have come in the last few years, or those that are in the pipeline, and make a note of them in your project bid. In addition to this, our local plan stipulates a requirement for development to be landscape-led and provide ecosystem services enhancements. So if you don't need planning permission, those are probably things that you need to note. But if you are going through the planning permission process, you've probably already addressed them by gaining your planning permission. So another group of assessment criteria are the partnership working in risk. We would expect parish councils to support your ambitions in any case, to show that there's a demonstrable support for the community and it aligns with any kind of neighbour plans or local ambitions in the area. One way of showing support for a project is to contribute some of the neighbourhood portion that may have been received by the parish council themselves. So I would highlight that the more match funding you receive, whether it's from the neighbourhood portion that the parish council receive or another source, the risk element of the assessment will score higher as there is less risk involved to the project coming forward. So deliverability and resources are also key to the assessment process. Make sure that you start planning what you need with regard to land ownership consent, planning permission, and a future maintenance plan. Your project being more ready to go is likely to attract attention. As noted by Chris in the earlier presentation, we do want projects that are able to rapidly deliver their objectives. So if you're, if there are outstanding queries, or you're thinking that you haven't got everything together yet, your project might score lower. But it's worth noting that there's guidance and a quick help guides to making your bids on our website, which should help you kind of hit those key criteria that we're looking for to help make your bid as best as it can be. So yeah. So how do you apply? Now, the South Downs opens up an online portal every year during our bidding window. It's called the Project for the South Downs, which any individual group or organisation can submit a project bid called an expression of interest. It's the first step of the funding allocation. And if your EOI is successful and your project is allocated funding, then there's a separate further detailed application that will need to be made and approved by officers separately. But obviously the link is available there, but head to our still spending pages on our South Downs website and you'll be able to get further information on those bits. It is worthy of note that if you are unsuccessful, your bid will be returned each time on that portal so that you can update your current bid for the next round. So if you feel like you're a few years away, maybe you can put in your bid and update it as you go along if you're unsuccessful, and it will allow you to kind of not have that effort and work gone to waste. So putting something in now is not going to kind of have to do the whole application process all again. So the bidding window is always after the allocation of the previous round of funding. And this decision is made by planning committee, so it does differ each year. Generally speaking, we open it in the autumn, but all parish councils and organisations who have submitted an interest will be notified of the opening. It will also be publicised on our web pages, social media, newsletters, as far as and wide as we can get it. But if you would like to be added to a mailing list to be kept informed of the South Downs bidding window being opened, you can email me separately to be added should you wish to do so. And there are my details. I appreciate that I've gone through this quite quickly. It's a very whistle-stop tour of our kind of still funding. But if you have any questions, please let me know. And our website is full of additional information as well. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jess. It was really, really useful. And so new community energy groups in the South Downs National Park, please keep an eye on that. And if you don't know about it already, and yeah, get in contact with Jess. Unfortunately, we've gone slightly over, Jess, so we'll capture any questions in the chat. And no, it's fine. Great to hear. And we're really keen that community energy groups look at this and see how they can interact with you. So, and I should say that all our presentations will be available afterwards. We have a YouTube of the session as well. So if people want to listen to it again and share. So can we, I'm going to ask now Rachel Coxcoon from the Centre for Sustainable Energy. If you can reveal yourself, Rachel, and share your presentation.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Rachel.
Okay.
Joining.
Share my screen. 1 minute.
Welcome to South Downs National Park.
It's very nice here. Looks a lot like where I live.
Good.
Rachel, shall I share the link to your impact tool in the chat box so people can play along?
Yeah, if you could do that. It does come up on my slide, but if you've got it there and you want to put it in the chat straight away, that's good. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that slide? Yeah, okay, great.
Big thumb.
Good. Are you all right for me to get going then?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, so some of you I know, a lot of you I don't. So my name's Rachel. I work currently for the Centre for Sustainable Energy in Bristol, although I'll be moving on from there at the end of May. And in my spare time, such as it is, I'm also a district councillor in the Cotswolds, where I'm the cabinet member for climate change and forward planning. So I do quite a lot of work with parishes and sort of local communities with both hats on, really. And over the last year, in fact, pre-lockdown, amazingly, we had started running in late 2019 a series of webinars for parish councils, particularly for parish clerks, through an organisation some of you might know called the Society for Local Council Clerks, because parish councils were increasingly coming under pressure from their communities to do something, to declare a climate emergency. And as relatively small public sector bodies, they were often feeling a bit swamped and not really knowing what to do. And interestingly, one of the first things that came out of the webinars or one of the most common questions was this request for some form of tool to understand the baseline carbon footprint for a given parish or town. So through the climate emergency support programme that I run at CSE, we had some funding available, and we were able to secure some extra funding from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And we embarked on a project to develop a tool that would help parishes understand their baseline emissions. And we had decided to go down the route of doing this in a consumption-based way. Budgetary limitations meant that we didn't want to do territorial footprinting as well, and we thought consumption-based footprints would be more useful for this very small geography. But then by a sort of happy accident, what happened was we discovered 3 or 4 months into the project that the University of Exeter, the Southwest Environment Research Network, were also working on a parish scale carbon footprinting tool, and they were taking a territorial approach. So this, we had a very friendly meeting, and we decided it would be marvelous if we just joined the 2 projects together and made a mega tool. So we now have something which is called Impact, which was named by one of the test parishes that attended our beta workshop. Some of you may have been involved in that back in January. It was one of the names that was suggested, and we rather liked it. And the tool was launched at the end of February. So what we've done really is we knew all along there were various other things we wanted this tool to do, but we wanted to get it out there at least as a parish scale tool that could give you the basic detail that you need about your community. So it's probably already in the chat bar, but on the bottom of this slide you can see the URL where you can visit the tool, and the web page looks like this. And I will in a moment actually use the tool so that I can sort of show you, because I want to talk you through the 2 different approaches to footprinting so you understand what it does. But while we're on this sort of image of it, I'll just show you some other things. It's a little bit, there's a big button that says get started, which is a little bit sort of sweet shop, and you tend to go straight for it. But I do recommend, if you're going to use the tool, that you first visit the about link top right, and that will bring up a bunch of other links like how to use the tool, where you can find videos about what the different footprinting methodologies are. There's also there a page called methodology, from where you can download a detailed PDF that explains what data sets we used and how they've been cut up to create the footprints. And also you'll see up here, you can see a link that says download the data, which if we have time at the end, I'll show you how it works. It's fairly self-explanatory, and it means that not only can you see it displayed visually on the website in the donut charts and so on that we've produced, but you can also go there and get a spreadsheet of data for your parish or a collection of parishes or your district or whatever. So we've taken these 2 different approaches to carbon footprinting, both of which are kind of accepted approaches, and both of which are useful in their own way. But what I discovered when I was doing the webinars for parishes is that a lot of people seemed to want a carbon footprint, but when it came to it, they didn't really know what a carbon footprint was or what it was telling them. And so often then when they were looking at other people's carbon footprints and they were comparing things, they weren't really comparing apples and pears, and they weren't really sure what they were looking at or what it meant to them. So we've taken 2 approaches, and just to kind of summarize what they are, the territorial approach to carbon footprinting, if any of you are involved in kind of national level inventories of carbon footprinting, this will be the approach you'd be more familiar with. It's the approach taken, you know, when you hear people talk about the greenhouse gas protocols and so on, and you hear people saying things like, it looks like the UK's emissions have come down, but that's because we've offshored things like production of consumer goods to China, so those emissions now belong to China. That's a sort of territorial approach to footprinting, that when people make those criticisms, that's what they're talking about. So territorial footprinting treats whatever geography you're talking about, whether that's a nation or a parish, as an island, and it attributes all emissions arising from activity within that particular boundary to you, to your community. So this would be industrial, commercial, agricultural, domestic, road transport and diesel railways and so on. The bits of those that pass through your parish are counted within your emissions profile. So that's quite important, particularly thinking about transport, for example. If you have a very large motorway or large A road running through a relatively small parish, and let's say you have hundreds of thousands of cars traveling up it in each direction every day, and 3 or 4 miles of it runs through your parish, you're kind of under a territorial approach, you're responsible for all of the emissions arising from all of those cars passing through your parish boundary every day. That's how territorial footprinting works, which kind of makes sense at a national level, but the smaller you go with territorial footprinting, the more of these weird artifacts you can end up getting in the data, and you can start to get things that seem a bit bizarre. Similarly, if you have, let's say, quite a small rural parish, very small population, but 3 or 4 extremely large farms, Your agricultural, if you're looking at it on a per household basis territorially, the emissions related to that agriculture are kind of apportioned to the 150 houses in that village, and it can make your footprint territorially look quite big, when actually as local residents, you may have very little control over what happens on those farms or that land management. Or if you live somewhere like Street in Somerset, where there's a big shoe factory or something, you know, those shoes are not all worn by the people of Street, they're mostly exported, but Street's responsible for the factory's emissions. A consumption-based approach, so a territorial approach, is essentially usually taking national, regional, or at the smallest local authority level data sets, and it cuts them down to a smaller geography. And in doing so, it has to make decisions about how to apportion things that cross the boundaries of smaller parishes and so on. So it's basically taking big data sets and cutting it down. A consumption footprint is based on household and address level data anyway. So what we're doing there is we're aggregating that data upwards to whatever geography we want, whether that's the parish or the town, or indeed you could do that backwards and create a national footprint. So this uses completely different data sets. The two bits of the two footprints that are the same is household energy use, which looks at the gas, electricity, and oil and other solid fuels that might be used to heat and light your homes. That's the same in both types of footprint, but otherwise it's looking at quite different things. So you can't compare your territorial footprint to your consumption footprint because it's two different things. So we're looking here at things like for transport, for example, rather than it counting the bit of road that runs through your parish, whether or not you're the people using it. This is talking about the mileage that you as local people choose to drive, to go to the shops, to commute to your jobs and so on. And I use choose loosely because I know sometimes we're forced to drive because we don't have any options because public and active travel infrastructure is not there. But a consumption footprint also includes things like goods and services. So our household goods, the cars that we buy, furniture, clothing, paint, kitchen equipment, even big things like cars, and it also services like leisure and cultural services and subscriptions that we are responsible for by choosing to use them. And the food footprint, rather than looking at things that are grown and produced within our boundary, which might be, you know, in my case, there's a hop farm and an orchard down the road and I don't drink a lot of apple juice or a lot of beer. So, you know, I don't really consume what comes from that. The consumption footprint is looking at the things we buy, much of which in a very small community, particularly if it's an urban town, is going to be imported. And also there will be things that will affect both footprints related to your building stock. You know, if you're a big rural area with lots of solid walled houses off the gas network, that will point to a larger household footprint. So I'm going to sort of show you the tool in real life now, and I'm going to use to try and give you a sense of why it's important to understand the difference between the two footprints. I'm going to show you two towns, a town and a village actually, one of which I'm sure you've all heard of, Totnes in Devon, and the other one, the fabulously named Berry Pomeroy, is the neighbouring parish. So it adjoins Totnes, but it's a sort of rural area to the side of it. So I'm just going to drag along, and they're different places. Totnes is obviously quite urban. It's a smallish town, 10,000 people or so live there. It's got a little A road that kind of cuts across the top of it, but doesn't really go through it in any great length. Middling to high income area, quite compact, walkable in terms of services, shops, schools, and so on. Whereas Berry Pomeroy has only about 1/10 of the people living in it, but it's a much bigger area, agricultural in nature, no particular industry to speak of, but it does have quite a lot of agricultural output and an A road running through it. So we're just going to go to the tool and I'll drag this onto this screen so that you should be able to see it again. So I'm going to have a thumbs up. Can you now see the website that I just dragged in? Great. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and in doing this, it'll help you see how the thing works. So I'm just going to type in Totnes. So at the moment, the geography of this tool only works on the civil parish, but we are fundraising to try and make it work for wards as well, which would mean then it would be England-wide. So when you go to the tool, you get this page. This comes up first. It always defaults to what you can see, which is a territorial footprint for the place you chose, and it's showing you per household. And you can slide that across to consumption and in total if you want. You can also click this little box here to give a subcategory view. And that basically shows you where the data set included subcategories of that data. It shows you what they're made up of. So this shows us for Totnes, just under 10 tonnes per household territorially is the carbon footprint, which is lower than average on our methodology, which would be about 14 or 15 tonnes. And the red section here is household energy use, which will be the same when we look at the consumption footprint. And that is made up of mains gas, space heating and water heating largely, electricity for your appliances, and then these tiny slivers here, which will be the little bit of solid fuel that's used in Totnes. And it breaks down the same for industrial and commercial use within the town. Can everyone make sure they're on mute? Because I've got a sort of lunch break happening in the background somewhere. Then we also have road transport, which if I said, as I said earlier, this relates to the roads that run through Totnes. It's not about whether people live in Totnes and are using them. This could also include people passing through, 1.4 tonnes a year. Aviation on a territorial basis is basically taking national figures and allocating that per head of population, which can be quite skewed because we all are aware that more affluent communities take more flights. So this in a way is quite an unfair way of doing it. Similarly, shipping, F-gases are taken from a national inventory, which is kind of extinguishers and refrigerants and so on. And then we can see that even Totnes, being largely urban, does have some agriculture, and agriculture breaks down into the emissions arising from cropping and livestock, as well as this smaller section, which is fuel use by the vehicles and machinery and so on the farm, and waste. When we look at this on a consumption basis, we're looking at a completely different set of data, apart from the red section, which, as before, is your household energy use. But here we have food and diet, which is not what is produced within Totnes, but it's what they import and what they consume. And that breaks down into meat and fish and all other food and drink. We have the consumption of goods and services, which is just under 6 tonnes of emissions per year for the people of Totnes per household. And that's broken down into the purchase of goods, so all those things I mentioned, like household goods, furniture, clothes, and so on, as well as the purchase of services. And then there's a bundle of other things that's explained within the methodology, which includes things like pensions and investments and so on. And then we have travel, and travel is broken into private transport, which is largely car use, motorbikes, a few vans and things like that, and flights. But here, rather than this being a proportional allocation of the national flight inventory, this is taking address level data on flying habits. So it's more likely to reflect the affluence and the real use of flying. And we do know that flying is a place where we can, where it's largely discretionary and we're making choices about it that we can choose not to make. And also public transport. So if we were to move a chunk of our private transport to public transport, it wouldn't just move over equally because the per mile emissions associated with public transport are lower. So we've looked at Totnes, and what we can do now is compare that to another place. So I've done that by going up to the top and clicking on compare, and that's brought me to a page with bar charts, which puts Totnes there for me because that's what I was already looking at. And I'm now going to put in Bury Pomeroy, which is that neighbouring parish I mentioned. And again, it shows us a territorial footprint first and foremost, and I can show these subcategories. And clearly the first thing that jumps out at you is that Bury Pomeroy has a much larger territorial carbon footprint than Totnes. And this is clearly two big sectors that are driving that. One is road transport and the other one is agriculture. And that reflects what I said about the two communities. It's a bigger area, it's a rural area, far fewer households, so those emissions are being divided by fewer addresses, as it were, but also there's an A road running through it for whatever it is, 3 or 4 miles, as well as a lot of rural area producing agricultural goods. Household energy use is also slightly higher, and that is because partly rural areas tend to have bigger homes, more off gas, more solid walls, more detached, but also, as is the case here, about a quarter of this parish is off the gas network, which means they're using oil, which has a higher carbon footprint than other heating fuels. But other parts are sort of the same. So I think this is why it's important to kind of know what you're looking at, because to the kind of uninitiated, you might look at this and go, well, Totnes are all pretty cool and Bury Pomeroy are the bad guys here. But we have to ask ourselves, what is it that they're doing that's making that? And is it really within their control? But also, what is it that Totnes are not doing that someone else is carrying the can for? And actually, in a territorial sense, what we can see is Totnes doesn't really produce any food. So if the people there are eating, they must be getting it from somewhere else. And it may well be that some of that is coming from Bury Pomeroy, but probably knowing our national system, it's coming from other places. So it's important to look then, therefore, at this from both sides every time. And if I switch to consumption view for the same two communities, we see something quite different, which is that they're really not that different after all. in a consumption sense, they have very similar consumption of goods and services. In fact, Totnes has slightly higher, and this is more the discretionary end of what we do as households. Again, household energy use is the same, and we see oil as a bigger section that doesn't really appear in Totnes. Flying and car driving habits are very similar, as is the consumption of meat and fish and so on. And what we can see here is that they're both at 16, almost exactly the same, nearly 17 tonnes a year. They're both above average, although not by much. I think the average is about 15 tonnes in our methodology, 14.5, something like that. So not by much, but so that's just to give you this interesting comparison of two communities that look very different when looked at one way and then the other. And I want to go back to the beginning because I want to show you one of the more extreme parishes that you can see on here. So this is Wisley in Surrey. So I'll just drag another web page across just so that I can show you this. And I'll get you back because every time I do that, you all disappear. So I don't know if you're familiar with Surrey, but if you are, Wisley is just south of London. As you come out of Wimbledon on the A3 heading down towards Portsmouth, you pass the Royal Horticultural Gardens or whatever it is. It's a very affluent part of Surrey, but it happens to have two motorway grade roads running through it, one of which is the M25 itself, and the other is the A3M, which, if you know it, it's a 3-lane A road, so it's basically a motorway. So the combined effect of both of those motorway grade roads running through what is otherwise a rural, affluent, desirable place to live is that they have an insane territorial footprint with hundreds of thousands of vehicles every week or whatever is passing through the parish, which gives them a footprint which is hundreds of tonnes per household. So this can be almost unusable for them if they're trying to think about what they do. And you can start to feel quite sorry for the good people of Wisley and how terrible, and this has all been sort of imposed upon them. But if we look at their consumption-based footprint, we can see that actually even their consumption-based footprint, reflecting that this is quite an affluent part of the country, is very high, 28 tonnes, so much higher than Totnes and Berry Pomeroy that we were just looking at, both of which were in themselves not low-income areas. We can see over 9 tonnes consumption in goods and services per household, which was half again, I think, as much as Totnes. We can see just over 3 tonnes a year of flights emissions from the people of Wisley, which is 3 times what the people of Berry Pomeroy and Totnes were taking, a bigger food and diet amount and slightly bigger housing energy use as well. So this is still a community that has choices that it can make, but it's definitely a community for whom a territorial footprint is almost unusable because of this huge infrastructure that they have relatively little control over. So just before I finish up, I'm just going to show you that on the website, if you can go to the About page, this is where you can come to the Using the Tool section, where it will give you a sort of case study approach, but it also gives you a couple of videos that will talk you through all those segments if you want a reminder of this. An FAQ page, the methodology is where you can download a full data set from, and a change log, which we've added now. If you do download a footprint from this and you want to come back to it in a couple of months, check that it hasn't changed in the interim as we've put new data sets on and so forth. And similarly, you can go to this page here and download your data, either by your parish, local authority or national, and whether you want to look at that territorially or by consumption basis. So those were the things we just looked at. I just want to leave you with this really, which is that when you're thinking about engaging with your community, when you're looking at your consumption footprint and you're looking at the things you think you can influence, it's important that you have a nuanced engagement with the people of your community, because not all carbon footprints are equal, as it is for countries, so it is for households. The richest households have carbon footprint of around about 3 times higher than the poorest 10% of households. And as we can see, lower income households, their footprint it doesn't have a lot of discretionary emitting in it. There's a large amount of basically keeping warm household energy use, often in less good housing. This bottom 10% are often in private rented housing and things like that. Whereas the richer groups have, bigger homes. So obviously they have a bigger space heating requirement, but tend to be more profligate because they're less worried about the bills. And they have this huge sort of aviation component and private car use. And it's questionable whether that can really be eaten into or whether that's absolutely necessary. And so I think just to finish up, I want to try and characterize how I think the two types of footprints can be used. And this is a bit crude, but ultimately I think a territorial footprint, when you're looking at it, this very small community level for a village or a ward or something like that, is sort of saying this is the infrastructural change that we think needs to happen around here, and it probably needs someone else to do it. There's regulatory change, stuff around travel and so on that we need to impact if we want to get people off the A3 or the M25. Whereas your consumption footprint, you're more likely to be looking at the things you can choose to change. Although even within that, I'm always very wary of this idea that individuals can make all the change, because as I said, often we're forced to do things because the other options like public transport are not available to us. But you just do need to be aware when you're using a footprint or looking at other people's footprints that you understand what methodological approach was taken to construct it. And I think that's it. I don't know if I've overrun my time because I don't know what time I started. Sorry about that.
No, that's perfect. Rachel, thank you very much. We've had some really good chat in the chat box. So, but actually you've hit on exactly your time. So I could probably squeeze in one question if anybody has got a dying question that you want to get out.
Can I throw in a question? Because I have the most commonly asked question that I get asked about this tool that it may already be in, and I will quickly cover it, which is that people have asked us quite a lot if they can enter their own data into the tool and kind of use it as a way of monitoring progress. And we've had to explain that it doesn't do that for two reasons. One is which is a software and cost reason, which is that to have a tool like that, you'd have to be able to put in, you'd have to have an account so that when you were visiting it, you were going back to your own profile and the changes that you'd made. But the other side of that is this complexity around how much data the tool has actually used to build it, and whether local communities or parishes would ever be in a position to collect data rigorously enough and regularly enough to replace data that's within the tool. So we think, bearing in mind it takes about 30 overall data sets, some of which draw on other data sets, we think that there's around about 200 data sets used in it to create the two different footprints. The net result of which is that we think it would be very hard for a parish to collect enough data to override bits of it. But also, if you were doing specific things like, well, we've built a solar farm, can we put that in? Because some of that data is based on things like grid electricity mix, it would end up being double counted as the grid electricity mix changed and we updated new data sets to it annually or whenever BEIS released them. We would find your solar farm was counted by you and by the underlying data. So you would get all of these errors emerging. Having said that, we are aware that people are really keen to be able to sort of think about impacts of actions they could take. So one of the next steps and what we're fundraising for is to do something where you could have a series of sliders where you could have example projects like we'll plant 20 hectares of mixed broadleaf woodland and manage it for 30 years. What impact would that have? Or, we'll build a 3 megawatt wind turbine or solar farm or something like that. So that's why currently it's not used as a tracker tool. And we don't actually think tracking long term, it will be something it can do or should do because of these complications. But we do think we want to build these example projects into it.
Excellent. I think that would be really useful. So there's been lots of chat. Maybe take some time, Rachel, if you've got some time to go through the chat and respond to some of them. There's a lot of, we've started some football matches against different villages, I think, who want to compete with each other. So, but thank you very much and thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'll go through while you're doing your next talk. I'll whiz through this and see if there's any I can answer on the chat.
So everybody, thanks for keeping with us. It's been, there's been a lot of information to take in, which is good. I'm going to invite Michael to the floor to talk about local funding for community energy, and then Nicola to wrap up and see, next steps, what we can do next. So okay. Michael, thank you very much.
Oh yes, Liz, can you add me as a co-host again, because I've dropped out.
You should be able to do it.
Sorry?
You should be able to share now.
Before Michael kicks off, to remind you that those people within South Downs National Park, that we're running the Pathways programme, and you can contact the CES team and to look at mentoring and to explore if you can set up your own community energy group, and through the Pathways programme. So just hand over to Michael now, he's all ready to go.
Yeah, everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yes, okay, grand. Okay, I'm just going to, so let's make sure I can move on. Yep, I found the bottom, right. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly talk about types of funding for community energy and think about how you can look at it. And rather than try and explain where you get who the funders are and such like, I want you to think about the overall picture. Again, there are lots of links to potential funding sources, but generally speaking, if you look at it in terms of the types of funding, charitable funding, people like that's often linked to large national trusts or potentially also local trusts in the area, and charities by their nature have to fund charitable objectives, which are things like relief of poverty or education or improving the environment, or it can be to support things within 5 miles or in the ancient parish of such and such. And all of those will vary. But again, looking at what they will be looking at is funding public benefit, basically. So people who maybe can't afford to do work around community energy, people who are, or things which actually make a big difference on that. Public sector funding is a different thing. Government grants, often they're large scale, they can be announced at quite short notice or pre-announced, and then nothing happens for quite a while. They can be announced, then closed, as we've had with the Green Home grants recently. But again, within that government public sector funding, there's a community infrastructure levy that's being talked about. The other thing that's potentially also worth thinking about for parishes is a public work loan board, which is also which is basically borrowing, but borrowing at very low interest rates for community assets. And there have been some examples of that being used by parish councils for community energy organisations. Community funding. So again, that can be for where organisations have got an income stream. You can be looking at things like community shares or community bonds. Community shares are talked about in terms of solar quite a lot. When the feed-in tariff was there, it was a very good project. It's harder to do, but still possible. Community bonds is where if you're not a public, if you're not an organisation, is not a community benefit society, you can potentially borrow at long term. And that, again, that's mentioned. And some of the local authorities are now doing it. There are tax relief is available, but not for energy. But if you're looking at something like energy saving, potentially there might be areas where you could encourage, you could do some fundraising, or and actually the investors would receive tax relief. But it's a complicated area. And then there's straightforward community fundraising. And that goes from the standard, the local fates, house-to-house collections, and again, it depends on what you are. If you're looking at something which is actually very low cost, but has an impact in the local area and is seen as important, people will fund things like that. But just as an example, basically, if you're looking at the community energy, my experience to date is that actually that is not seen as something that is people want to donate to. So as opposed to like the traditional charitable funding. So that's not necessarily that particularly viable. And then the large bit is commercial funding. And that's probably not the mostly relevant for community energy, but it might be actually is something that actually organizations will work towards. And it might also be that potentially partner organizations. So for example, if a developer is looking at solar farm in the local area, they might want to partner with a community organization. And in order to bring some community benefit in and spread the commercial benefit, and also basically to get public support locally. Instead of what works best is, again, depends on what you're trying to achieve. So it could be, if you're looking for income for the group, support for energy saving, for those on low income, some of those things are mutually contradictory. There was a point people said, oh, what I want to do is I want to cut carbon emissions, get an income for our group, and support those who can't actually afford to make changes. And actually, you can't do that all with one project. You actually have to look at different ways of doing things. But that the early days of feed-in tariff basically gave enough of an income to be able to achieve all those three options. Those options are now largely gone. You have to look at, you're looking at either prioritizing or saying we're doing several things, doing each of which is doing slightly different. Community buy-in is really important. It's been mentioned, I think, in the chat in some of the organizations, people were looking at this. The lottery, the National Lottery Community Fund, for example, their motto is people in the lead. And so they're looking for, they don't want somebody to come along and say, oh, I've had this great idea. Can you give me some money to do it? They want to say, I've had this great idea and I've talked to lots of people in the local area and they all say it's a great idea. And yes, some these are people who come alongside and now we want to do that. So and it links again with the community energy. And with the work we as mentors encourages that basically doing something on your own is very, very hard work. Doing with something with 2 or 3 other people is actually a lot easier in the long term. And those are the kind of things that will make a difference in terms of getting funding. Structure, again, if you're a charity, then you are limited on what you can fund. So a lot of charities will only other fund charities. Some will fund community groups. Public Works Loan Board, borrowing is only available by councils, but parish councils can use that. And again, that's something that's possible to do that. Level of expertise and the commitment, whether you're in for the long haul, 3 years plus, or whether you've actually got a group who want to do something quickly. And actually what you need to do is lots of small projects, each of which have an impact. Then things like the Rural Community Energy Fund is available at the moment. It's available to the end of this year. If South Chance National Park actually falls, I think, both within the southeast, the southeast and the southwest regions, depending on where you are in the park. But the point about a feasibility study is that at the end of the feasibility study, you still got it won't actually have changed anything. You've still got some work to make a difference on that, but it can enable things to happen. And within the Community Energy South website, there will be links to funding sources, and there are lots of other organisations like Directive Social Change and Funding Finder, which will also link up to that. I'm just going to have a quick example of actually how this might work in practice. So Reading Hydro, I've been a director of Reading Hydro myself as a volunteer director. We aim to put 46 kilowatts. It's actually increased to 65 kilowatts after in 20 years' time on the term of the Caversham Weir. And it started life as a CIC, got grant funding, which got feasibility work done, and that led to planning permission and environmental agency licenses. They then set up Reading Hydro CBS Limited, but basically was still without much funding. And then with that, then got further grant funding from the Key Fund and ran a pioneer share offer. So again, support from the local community, which raised about 32,000, and that then got all the remaining permissions and started to work on project designs. From that, then went out as a community benefit society to using the community share offer, using the standard mark. The first estimate was 700,000, and that was raised in about 2 or 3 months. But basically, that funded detailed design and then procurement and construction, and it's actually ended up with being final cost of 1.15 million. So quite a big change, but it was all being funded by community investment. And of that community investment, £100,000 came from an organisation called the Booster Fund, which was basically one of the link from Power to Change. But again, it's some people wanting to support renewable community investment. And £20,000 came from Westmore Solar. So a solar farm which actually has a lot of cash and basically wanted to use that cash to support other organizations. So you're beginning to see that actually what you're getting is an environment which is supporting that local that wider investment. And the end result of all that is in the background there. That is the concrete for the Archimedes screws, which are due to be delivered next Tuesday. And that will then supply 40 years of renewable energy, well, 40 years plus, which is entirely owned by the community. So that's a very quick indication about the potential of what can be done with funding. That's basically what I wanted to cover, and that we will be able, as sort of myself and Nicola as mentors, are able to provide more information about funding potential. Okay, so that's me done.
Cool. Thank you, Michael. I'll just come off. And we've got resources on the South Downs National Park on the Pathways site page. I don't think the grant information is up yet, or the funding information is up yet. I think it's going up in the next few days. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great. And so I'm going to pass straight on to Nicola now, as time is getting tight, to summarize, Nicola, and I can help you if you like.
Thank you very much, Ollie. So I've only got 3 slides for the next bit. I'll just pop them up, and this time hopefully it will work properly. Here we go. Yeah, so where to go from here? I think we've had lots of terrific advice today from so many different angles. But if you're based in the South Downs, contact us for future support through our mentoring and business development support, which we've referred to that several times as Pathways. And whether or not you're in the South Downs, view the extensive roadmap guidance document we've produced. It's got every step of the way. There's about 70 pages on it. It's really simple and informative. It incorporates the guidance from the National Park Authority as well, including SIL. And it includes lots and lots of links there for some of the great projects, including the Reading Hydro project that Michael has just mentioned. And see the projects page on our website and get involved in existing projects, replicate a project in your area if that's what you'd like to do, or do something entirely new. And if you're based in another area, consider whether you see a demand for our support and whether we can have a conversation about creating a Pathways programme in your area in the south. But some great tools to recap on, and which are mentioned in the Pathways guidance document right at the end. We've got Sustainable Overton, which have produced great resources in terms of toolkits, which are ideal for parish councils and other areas. And there's Carbon Copy, which promotes fantastic carbon saving initiatives all around the country. And the whole idea is to provide enough information for you to go off and replicate something in your area. And there's also BHESCO in a box, and the impact tool, which Rachel has taken us through today, I think is going to be a tremendous asset. But all those are mentioned in the guidance document. So please do take a look, download that roadmap and see what you can do yourself. And lastly, join us at Community Energy South. Membership is free to new groups, so we're not going to be pestering you for money. Community Energy South is a regional hub of Community Energy England, so we're super well connected to support members to grow projects. And membership benefits include workshops and networking meetings. You've got events like today. You've got priority access to our training sessions and events, oodles of advice and support services, and our regular monthly newsletter, which Ollie earlier on invited you to contribute to whenever you like. Advertising space for your fundraising campaigns. In fact, Made Energy used the space there for when we had a share offer. And really importantly, a forum for sharing support services. So do have a look at our website, get in touch with us. We're a really friendly bunch. And that's my last slide, Ollie. Over to you to finish up.
Oh, thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you. Yeah, like I say, it's been a wealth of information today. There are practitioners on this call as well. Do send us items for our newsletter so that everybody can share it. It's really helpful to try and raise that. And if you've got any thoughts following this, do be in contact. We've got more, another masterclass coming up next month. But please do be in touch from South Downs National Park communities to link in, and we'll get you involved and up and running. So thank you, and thank you for Liz for driving this session behind the scenes, and to Nicola and Michael and all the speakers, and Chris and all the team at South Downs National Park for for raising this community energy as a support mechanism for climate change.
Can I just add one last thing? Oh, look, my hair's all messy. That you can, if you want to save the chat, because there's lots of useful links in the chat and lots of questions and answers. If you just click on the little 3 buttons in the chat box, you can save the chat to your own computer, and you can then access any links you may need. Just last little bit of helpfulness, I hope. And apart from that, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you particularly to all our speakers and all the time you've put together. You've put this together.
Great, Liz, and I think you're going to leave the session open for a while if anybody wants to.
Yeah, we'll chat to each other.
Yeah.
And if you want, if you need, if there's like lots of people from Hambledon or Amberley and you want me to create a breakout room so you can chat to each other in a breakout room, let me know and I'll create a breakout room for you. You can have lunch together.
Good. Well, thank you very much.
About your iPad.
Great. Well, I'll sign out here. I'll call the session closed. And a big thank you to everybody. We can all have a wave, but please do stay on and come off mute and, say something.
Thanks.
I've just seen one comment that the chat can't be saved on an iPad. So I've saved it. So if anyone would like me to email it to them, I'm very happy to do so. Drop me an email. I'll put my email in the chat so you can contact me.
That's a good idea.
Thanks, Nicola.
Great. And I think what we'll do is I'll definitely look through this chat and see if we can do a Q&A in our next newsletter. Just because, thank you. I mean, everybody, there were so many good questions that came up in the chat in the background. It'd be good to capture a lot of that. And Chris Patterson, I'll be contacting you if you're still here. Because I know you've been capturing the ones for South Downs National Park.
Yes, I've captured them, Ollie, and I've also taken a copy of all of the chat. So if I missed any, I'll hopefully be able to go back and find them.
Okay. Well, drop us a mail and we can put together a Q&A.
Will do.
One of my
I responded to a few, Chris Patterson. So, but as I said, I sent those directly to the author. So it might be we just have to compare notes after the session and make sure those responses are captured.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I will send something around to all of us with the questions, I think, and then if people have got answers, we can put them together and get them across to Ollie for the newsletter.
Great, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And I see Martin Heath was there in the background. It's always good to see Martin. Are you going to reveal yourself, Martin?
He is revealed.
Any comments?
Hi, Ollie. No, it's an excellent session. Thanks for that. And I'll put some comments in the chat box.
Oh, great.
Looking forward to the next one, actually.
Good, good.
We're just waiting to clarify the date, actually, Martin.
Okay. Yeah, well, let me know. I think, did you send me some dates?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. I think they're okay.
Yeah, and unfortunately, only 2 people have returned my message about dates. Anyway, this isn't interesting for anyone else here, but
yeah.
mid-May, everybody, for the next one.
I think let me know the dates and I'll push it through. Michael and I can push it through.
Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like people are wanting to stay and chat.
No, that's okay. Well, it's been a good session.
It's quite a long time.
Liz, it's Adrian Court who sadly dropped off when I was being asked a question. I posed a question and Ollie was about to come back to me and my broadband collapsed and took me this time to get it back again. But I just wanted to not just congratulate you on such a great session, but also to bemoan the fact that I've kind of avoided or missed out on the role of community energy, having attempted to get something going maybe 14 or 15 years ago. If I just may spend half a minute on a bit of my background, which is involved in community water company, which it's an unusual animal, which is a water company that intercedes between the utility, the incumbent, and the developer, and hopes to give them a better service. And we until very recently, were a founder of such an organisation that had a project down in near Fareham, and that's a project where there's a big developer moving in across the road almost, and it's going to downgrade, if you like, the energy bills or whatever. The existing village is going to look rather poor in comparison to all the new whizzy stuff, which was my point earlier this morning. And that's why I posed the question, and I can see some members. Michael, I think you were almost referring to that same thing when I got back on board about the how developers could make it easier for themselves if they saw themselves as a driver of change, bringing new technology into that area, where there aren't any members yet because no one's bought houses. And I've always maintained that, as a water company, that we need to get to know the local people in order to deliver our own service, which is basically to return water back to the estate rather than have it all go down the drain.
Whereabouts are you based, Adrian?
I live in Kew, but I have a wide interest. It goes beyond the UK into Mallorca, Poland. I'm involved in regenerative agriculture as one of my, I won't say it's a skill set, it's just a passion I've picked up over many years. I've been involved in climate change consultancy.
Yeah.
And it's just great to see you guys and how much you've done. And I keep saying to people, if you want to do anything local, get hold of your community energy group. Don't start from scratch.
And so where do you see the synergies between, and how would you see the community energy company working with the community water organisation?
Well, as you know, for every £1 you spend on water, you spend £4 on energy pushing it around. So the nexus between water and energy is great. But also, I'm very aware of Dutch projects and other projects where energy is extracted from wastewater to supplement, the water from the heat from whatever other source. And of course, there's energy from biogas, which currently is done at a large scale in the UK. Groups like Wessex Water, who we were a partner with till recently, have this huge biogas project at Avonmouth. Unfortunately, one of the storage units blew up a few months back and killed a few people. But the Dutch are actually recovering human waste within a community and using that as a supplementary power source, electricity source.
As a form of biogas? As
biogas, yes. It's a very old technology. 300 million Indians use it. But it's coming back here, but of course with all the safeguards that you'd expect. And we're trying to pioneer that, but it's quite difficult to get to create change within the eyes of a developer. It takes a long time to move the needle.
Have you worked with a chap called John Baldwin?
No, name sounds familiar.
He's massive biogas aficionado and works with water. He was at the Renewable Energy Association for many years. He was a consultant at the REA.
That's where I've come across him then. It's hard to keep track of.
Yeah, well,
people.
down here, Adrian, I must go in a second, but down here we have really good links with Southeast Water and Southern Water, who have just gone through PR19, so their next price review period.
Yes.
And actually now they're obligated to go to renewables.
Yes.
We competed in the tender to put community energy into that, so that community energy groups could compete in the tenders for both organisations to install renewables. So if you haven't got anything for those two organisations, we're very well connected with them, as is the National Park, of course.
And a few years ago, though, the water companies, I don't know if they still are, but until recently, they were certainly flaring off quite a lot of methane rather than capturing it. It was quite shocking.
It should be pumped into the grid as it is at Avon now. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's really
My
shocking.
thing is that I'm really keen for communities to understand where their water comes from. You know, that it needs to be powered. So, you know, a lot of water treatment sites in rural villages are too small for the community, and especially with new housing. And that provides other issues, you know, from environmental issues. And I'd like to see communities being able to power their own water treatment sites and be more connected with their water.
Well, we have, Ollie, we have the Aquifer project, as you know, which is looking at water, particularly around the conurbations of Brighton. I think perhaps we haven't made the connection yet between that and the potential around energy.
What
Yeah,
is the Aquifer project?
Water, or is that with
Well, it's principally a resource protection project, but it looks at working with the farming community particularly to try and deal with issues around nitrates and phosphates in the water.
It's a huge issue.
Yeah, which
well,
is a
if the
biggie for us.
Environment Agency are involved with that. We've had very good discussions with the Environment Agency wanting to go to net zero for their pumping. And
Well, we're active partners with in the Aquifer project with the water company in the area, and it's something we could add into the discussions, I think. So it's probably one to make a mental note of, Ollie, I think.
Okay. We can meet up soon, Chris.
I think we need to, don't we? There's a lot to catch up on.
I think it's also.
I mean, I was very struck by the interest around building standards and the fact that, you know, the bar is not very high. And obviously we've tried to push that as best as we can through our policies and aim for as best as we can get. But it would be, if that was, you know, along with all the other announcements about ambitious carbon targets, if they started to raise the standards there a bit and help us, I think that would be a big
I don't know how you tackle the impact of the home builders, though. The Home Builders Federation are an incredibly powerful lobby. I did some events with them many years back when I was at the Renewable Energy Association, because they used to hate us and we didn't talk to them. So I made quite a lot of efforts to integrate us and get the two, but they, you know, they're just a very powerful lobby at keeping the standards low.
I think about, you know, buyers have a big degree of influence on it. And if people are saying, I want a net zero home, or you know, words along those lines, but they build what they think people want to buy rather than
well, they build as cheap as they can. But do you, so at South Downs National Park, can you have an impact on that and require them to build to a particular standard?
Well, I think it was the kind of discussion we had earlier. I was trying to, you know, I think the policies we have probably can be pushed further. SD2, the ecosystem service policy, I think we can adapt to set the bar higher and require, and we certainly, with the additional planning guidance we developed recently, we were trying to push as far as we could.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think under the local plan review, maybe we can see if we can go further.
That's
I
good.
think
Yeah,
that is a big opportunity, isn't it? It's the local plan review. We're certainly pushing with our local council. We're developing tens of thousands of homes in Basingstoke. We want to push the standard far above than the building regs. It's got to be carbon neutral.
But it being confident you can get it through pins, that's the thing.
Yeah, it is going to be hard work, but fundamentally, it's a pretty key area.
If I can also add,
back to Adrian's point, I mean, it would be nice to see whether we could have community ownership of quite a few utilities, not just energy, but, and going back to the point of broadband would be another one, water, all those sorts of things could be community owned, and that's certainly that's the next stage.
A couple of points coming out of what you're saying, which is the need for developers to meet nutrient targets, discharge targets, and that's bringing in this quite new concept of nutrient trading, nutrient offsetting.
Yeah, we have one scheme already underway in the park.
Yes.
Nitrate.
Right.
One.
Is that with farmers or is it?
That's with farmers, yeah, but it raises that difficult issue that the farmer may not actually be the best performing in terms of environmentally, but is receiving a benefit for effectively cleaning up his act. I'll put it as diplomatically as I can.
It depends. Yes, it brings up the issue of permanency about the intervention he's making. It's got to be like carbon offsetting. It's got to be permanent. You know, it's not do it and then remove it.
And have sort of conservation covenants built in. So
are you familiar with Entrade, who are running this auction with?
A little bit. I mean, I don't lead on the natural capital funding element. It's an area the national park is interested in. We would love to see a carbon market within the national park or national parks and establish a price for that. You know, maybe that'd be slightly different to wider area. I don't know. There's all sorts of things.
There is a code for that, isn't there? You're aware of the woodland
carbon code.
Carbon code, which is the first.
Yeah, well, we're working behind the scenes to see if we can establish a similar mechanism for other habitats, particularly wetlands and grasslands, because at the moment, woodland, it exists, and obviously peatland, another big carbon sink, but we need we need it to apply to other natural habitats.
Can I just ask a question about your woodland, your nutrient trading?
I've got to shoot.
Hi, Ollie.
Thank you, Ollie, for your question.
Yeah, I need to go in a minute, but I'll stay on if there's a question, Liz.
Oh, well, it's just if they're doing. Sorry, Ollie. If they're doing nutrient trading, is it not also possible to? I mean, I don't know, but if everybody were to have a nutrient allowance, then the nutrient trading doesn't just benefit the polluters, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think the trouble is it's a bit early because we thought carbon would be the main driver here, but the nitrates one has come forward earlier, mainly because it's a hindrance on new houses being developed.
Oh.
So it's being developed apace, and actually the metrics aren't quite aligned behind it. So we're a little concerned to make sure we get the gains out of it that we want to see.
There's a lot of gaming going on. Yes.
Yeah.
You're right. It takes such a while, does it? Just, I mean, look how long it took the carbon market. I got involved in the early 90s in the first carbon trading fund with the World Bank, and it's only just now beginning to everyone relaxing about the value of carbon, wanting to increase it, of course. But these things take
I mean, we're seeing a lot
time.
of the, if you like, the international organisations that are dealing with carbon schemes across the world are now looking at the UK because it's a maturing market and actually they can see it will work. So it's an interesting juncture, I think.
It is. Well, I'm glad to have stayed around long enough to see it happen, to be honest.
Yes.
It's gratifying.
It's likely to see me out to my retirement as well, I think. Anyway, I must go. It's been a real
thank you very
pleasure.
much for your patience and listening. It's been great. Valuable experience. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Bye
All
all.
the best. Bye.
Thank you.
I'm going to disappear as well.
Yeah, bye,
Okay.
Mike.